Devil, my friend. This is going to be a very fun episode. Quite the interesting discussion for us to have about a writer, a director, a producer that we're quite fond of. And of course, a little bit of appreciation and kudos goes out to you, my fine friend, as when we tend to do our director episodes, they're horror directors. There's, of course, things here and there. Joel Schumacher, don't necessarily know if we would call him specifically a horror director, but considering our you and me when it comes to the Lost Boys, like we weren't going to talk about Joel Schumacher. However, I needed to throw a little bit of the bro code in on you for this one because while he isn't specifically a horror director, there isn't a horror fan alive, and I'll die on the hill for that fight, that doesn't love this man or a series of his movies, or at least a type of one or two or three of those movies. And I really didn't want to wait till like season 5 to talk about the great Tim Burton. So I appreciate you, my friend, and it's going to be a fun little gothic-y conversation.
Oh yeah, when it comes to like you said, when it comes to these horror directors and stuff, yeah, I mean, I would never consider myself or consider Tim Burton again a horror director. He's very horror adjacent, very like dark gothic kind of like, scary kind of horror like themes and stuff. Although, when we get into these movies and we start talking about some stuff, we can talk about, when we get into like into Sweeney Todd or Sleepy Hollow, it's pretty graphic, you know what I mean? Like as far
Yeah.
as like the bloodlust and stuff like that, and decapitations and like the gore and the horror aspect of it. Oh yeah, I mean I wouldn't go as far as saying it's Dawn of the Dead ripping head bodies apart, but it's like Sweeney Todd. It gets pretty gory. I mean it's over the
Yeah.
top blood, but of course it's gonna do, especially because like I said, when we get into that, kind of wanted to like amp the the play version of where they can only show so much, so it's like hell yeah. So like I said, like you said, when it comes to Tim Burton, yeah, everybody out there, like you said, I'm pretty sure every horror fan might not like all Tim Burton films, but there's at least a horror film. If you're a horror lover and like horror is your number one, I can guarantee you that you at least love one to 900 Tim Burton films. So it's like, why not talk about it? You know what I mean? It would be, if it wasn't for some Tim Burton films, there might be not directors that eventually wanted to do movies and were horror directors that have, that said that, Tim Burton inspired them, even though they're particularly a horror director, wanted that, they loved this movies. So it's like, yeah, we might as well talk about it. Plus, it's like, there's a bunch of good fun stuff inside of this stuff like that when it comes to Tim Burton movies. So it's gonna be interesting, like his catalog is dark and gothic, but then it goes weird and light and kooky, and you never
Yeah.
know what you're gonna get. One thing you're gonna get in a Tim Burton movie is you're gonna get some weird shit, and 95% of the time you're gonna get Danny Elfman doing the score for him.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, when it comes to like horror fans, like give me 3 chances. I'm very confident that 3 chances is all I need to get you to say, yes, I like that movie or I love that movie. And if I get put on the spot, give me 3 chances to hit you with either Beetlejuice, Nightmare Before Christmas, or Edward Scissorhands. And if you give me 5 opportunities, I'll throw in, just like you said, my friend, Sleepy Hollow and Sweeney Todd. Somewhere in that 5, I'm just about willing to bet, my life on that. I'm going to get you with one of those movies. Again, stylistically, Tim may or may not be your guy, depending on the type of horror fan that you are. But I do feel that pretty confident with that within those 5 chances, and for me, those 5 movies, I'm gonna get you with one of them. But yeah, man, let's have a little bit of fun and discuss a little bit of the great Tim Burton. And a lot of people would probably be like, well, then of course they got to start off with this one. No, not so much, because we like to do the chronological build. And while it became a full length, let's talk a little bit of the slightly less matured Frankenweenie
Oh
in their
yeah, I mean,
short film version.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've always loved this movie. I remember, like, the short film. I remember, seeing it. Obviously, anybody who has the, although we're gonna talk about anybody who has the Nightmare Before Christmas, like, bigger collecting edition box set usually has that. Now, granted, yes, I mean, we could have started off with one of my favorite things that Tim Burton did, which was Vincent. And I love Vincent. I love that short film, but it's such a short film where
Yeah.
this is that movie's like 6 minutes long.
Yeah,
Where at
that's the
least,
definition of a cup of coffee.
yeah, so like this one is a little bit different. It's not a full length. It's 20, it's like 25, 26 movies. It's 26 minutes long. But like I said, a lot of people, who might not have known, like I said, with the Frankenweenie that comes on later on, that, at one point this was a live action film that Disney, did, he started doing all these like short films and things like that, and, these family stuff. And then, like, who's not to love, what I mean? It's got freaking, one of our loves that we've talked about millions of times with Shelley Duvall, playing the mom, and it's such a cool iconic movie. You got, like I said, you got Daniel Stearns in it. Obviously, everybody knows from like Home Alone and all that fun stuff. And then you got, like, Francis Coppola's daughter Sophia's in the film,
Yeah.
and then the main kid who plays Vincent Frankenstein is Baird Oliver, which a lot of people would know from the Never Ending Story. So it's cool to see, cool to see that. And like I said, it's funny because I watched this version and then went straight into the animated one, which we'll talk about when it gets to that time. But yeah, I always thought this was a cool movie. I'm a huge fan of ghouls and fiends that grew up in the 70s and the 80s. Would always remember Spud McKenzie, the dog. So I was always really into those bull terriers that he does, and I always thought it was a cool movie. It's like, again, he's not reinventing the wheel. It's basically the story of Frankenstein. You know what I mean? But put in a little kid's view of losing a pet and trying to
Yeah.
bring that pet back and stuff like that. So I always love it. Like I said, I mean, especially when we're going through this Tim Burton chronology, it's a lot of things you're gonna get. Always, you're gonna get a lot of this stuff. You're gonna see a lot of these kind of images. His a lot of themes that are always the same. With bringing back dead lives, the dead and the living together. So a lot of Frankenstein references. Tim Burton's a huge Frankenstein fan. So obviously with this, with the basically being the story of Frankenstein, but even throughout all of his movies, there's always little nods of like Frankenstein stuff in all of his movies. So, like, who doesn't want to start off with Frankenweenie? And like I said, it's it's
Yeah.
it's it's such a fun movie, and it's like, even now when I still watch it, it's so sad when Sparky dies, and it's just like it's such a good wholesome movie, but with that little bit of undertone, darkness and goth stuff, and which, that was the reason why Disney didn't want to do a lot of stuff with Tim, because it's family friendly, but it's got those dark undertones.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there anything just more Tim Burton out there than getting in trouble right off the bat in your career for being too like dark and scary? Like there's just nothing more Tim Burton in my opinion than to like I said, to immediately get in trouble with your style.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like you said, when you watch the movie, I love the nod at the end where, obviously, he's Sparky's got the electricity with him, and he kisses the girl poodle that he's in love with, and makes the big white spark on the side of her head, obviously referencing the Bride of Frankenstein. So I mean, like I said, I mean, it's such a good movie. Like I said, I mean, when we talk about the full animated one, yes, it's got a lot of similarities. They did a lot of stuff, but obviously, you're making a full length movie versus the short film. And like I said, when it comes to short films, this was one of my favorite short films, like, growing up and watching it. And like I said, I was super happy when I found out that the collector's edition of Nightmare Before Christmas that I had Vincent and had the full length the Frankenweenie on it. So I was like super, super happy about it. But most people, when they talk about Tim Burton and you're going to talk about his chronological, like you said, they're not going to really think about that Vincent or Frankenweenie. I'm going to add Frankenweenie. The big one, and especially, me being the biggest fan of the entire world, is the Pee Wee Herman. You know what I mean? Everybody
I was gonna
thinks,
say, Devil, it is not my place to take us into the next movie.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a reason why. I mean, let me see. Where's my dude at? Bam! Pee Wee Herman. It's my man right there. Anyway, yeah. Like I said, I'm a huge Tim Burton fan, but I've always been a huge Paul Rubens fan. I've always been a huge Pee Wee Herman fan and stuff like that. So anybody out there that hasn't seen the Paul Rubens, biopic that just came out recently, I implore you to do it. It's one of the best docs. I mean, I just love the fact that he just plays around with the camera, messes around with them, playing jokes with them the whole entire time. You don't know if he's serious half the time, and half the time he's not. And then the revelation that came out. I don't want to spoil it, but there's some stuff that obviously people know that he passed away and he was actually dying while he was filming this and stuff like that. But like I said, yeah. So like when you go into Tim Burton, yeah, you got to go. And like we've talked about these directors with these bangs and these ones for the stuff like that. I mean, who can not think of a cooler movie to start off with than your directorial debut
Yeah.
doing Pee Wee, Pee Wee's Big Adventure, man. It's so awesome.
Absolutely, man, for sure. And I mean, dude, the cast is so great just outside of Paul alone. I mean, you've got E.G. Daily, you've got Phil, it's co-written by Phil Hartman. You've got John Wayne Gacy
Yeah,
starring in the movie. Yeah, John Wayne Gacy.
yeah,
In Mark Holton, of course, of Teen Wolf fame. But I just love his portrayal of that character. But anyway, it's just such a cool movie because the other thing I also love about this movie is again, that's your guy, that's your movies, your series, but also neither one of them, both Paul nor Tim, had really peaked yet. And I don't mean peaked as in, of course, this is when they peaked. It's like they really hadn't exploded onto the scene, I guess is a slightly better way to put it. This is Tim's, full length movie debut. People were just kind of aware of him. Same with Paul. This was the debut of this character. The TV show itself wasn't even live yet. And so the idea of like this character, and Paul is doing like the promoting of the movie, like in the Pee Wee Herman character. He's going on talk shows, he's showing up in places, he's just doing things fully as Pee Wee Herman. And that's what I remember from when I was younger, when that was a thing, is trying to figure out like who this dude is. I knew his name, not his real name, but the Pee Wee Herman name. But I was like, why is this Pee Wee Herman cat just kind of like showing up places? And I just kind of learned later on that was just part of the whole, building up of the character, building up curiosities about the movie, considering, it had nothing to fall back on because it was the first.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, most people who didn't, if you knew who Pee Wee Herman was, you only really knew about him if you lived in the LA area and went to a lot of his comedy shows. Because at the time, that's what his character was. His character was kind of
Yep.
like a rude, kind of more crude. I mean, that the TV, the live performances he was doing were definitely a lot more adult related, even though it was still, Pee Wee Herman. He was still kind of doing his gags and he doing all the stuff with all the gag tricks and things like that. But yeah, like I said, I love the fact that yeah, it's like even in the movie, it's Pee Wee Herman in the credits as himself. It was never, for the longest time, no one even realized that Paul Rubens and Pee Wee Herman were the same person. You know what I mean? It was always, like I said, he was always Paul, it was always Pee Wee Herman. Everywhere he went, it was Pee Wee Herman. It wasn't like this is a character that I do, eventually, when it came out. But like I said, I love that. And like I said, even watching this when I was, doing, seeing this movie 9 billion times and stuff like that, there was like things that I didn't realize, like in the scene that I always love where he's going in and saving all the pets and stuff like that, and leaves the snakes for last. He actually does not like snakes, and Tim purposely told him to do that last. And when he has snakes, yeah, a lot of them are rubbery that he's holding, but there are real snakes, and he really did not want to do that scene. But in the scene where they let go one of the poodles, the poodle that he does is Darla the poodle, who's known for, in horror as, as Precious from Silence of the Lambs.
Yes.
Also, but I didn't even realize, now that I think about it, I'm like, okay, but poodles can all kind of look the same. But Precious from Silence of the Lamb was also the same dog from the neighbor from the Burbs, the old man. I was like, oh my god, I never knew that
Precious
those
got
were still the
around.
two same dogs. Obviously, like I said, poodles all kind of look the same. And then, what's not to love? You got Pee Wee Herman, you got the stupid jokes. I know you are, but one of my, the whole entire time he's like trying to find his bicycle, even though he's going and doing all this stuff like that. It's such a great movie. And then to add it all together, especially as a kid, like I said, I loved, this is didn't really, at that time didn't love Tim Burton because I didn't really know who he was. But I knew about this Pee Wee Herman character and watched it and stuff like that. And you see this, and then lo and behold, you watch the movie, and out of left field, Twisted Sister comes out of nowhere doing the music video for it. And I was like, oh, how much more badass can this freaking movie be? I mean, you got Tim Burton, you got Pee Wee Herman, you got all these awesome freaking characters in this movie, and then you add in Twisted Sister to it. I'm like, dude, this is like, like I said, you talk about that directorial debut. It's just like it's a home run with that. Like I said, Pee Wee Herman is not
Yeah.
everybody like especially at that time, you know what I mean? A lot of people just thought he was annoying as shit. And some kids liked him, some kids don't, some adults liked him, some adults didn't. But in general, you know what I mean? He was kind of like one of those ones where he was a little kooky. People didn't know how to kind of take him and stuff like that. But like I said, I've always loved that movie. I think it's like, it's just he's just a weird character that I always felt like he was like the king of the misfits. You know what I mean? He was
Yeah.
just like a weird, grown man that doesn't want to grow up. So it's like I said. So it's like you're adding that with the Tim Burton. So it's like like I said. I mean, it. I mean, obviously, when we do the top five that we always do for directals, it's gonna be no doubt that Pee Wee Herman is probably gonna be my number one.
Yeah.
I mean, I could probably go a route and maybe not put it in my number one, but more than likely I'm going to. But then again, there's so many other Tim Burton movies that we're going to talk about. So it's like his one is, as far as when it comes to me and you, and we're doing these directorial ones, when we do our top five, I think so far as when it comes to this, it's probably going to be the one that is going to be the hardest. It'll probably be easier to do our bottom five than our top five for Tim
Oh yeah.
Burton. And then I think it's going to be one of those ones where we're not going to have a very similar list. It's going to be all over the place. And that's what I said. That's what I love about Tim Burton. So, you know,
Absolutely. Because your number one is not going to be my number one because my number one
this is a
is
mix.
up for discussion right now. Say it once, say it twice, three times the charm as he brings up Beetlejuice, which is just so awesome. And don't get me wrong, Devil, we'll jump right into this. We'll have the discussion. The Fangs and Infernos, everybody knows Beetlejuice in some facet of the breakdown and whatnot. Like I said, it's probably the one movie right off the bat that I would hit horror movie fans with and be like, if you're not a Tim Burton fan, I bet you still love Beetlejuice or like Beetlejuice. That would still be the first one that I go with. But I mean, Beetlejuice, it's just simply become iconic. It's so awesome. The lineup, it's stellar. I mean, obviously Tim Burton, directing it, but you've got Michael Keaton, Catherine O'Hara, Jeff Jones before he went crazy. Winona Ryder, uh, Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis. Like, even the secondary characters are so great because they're also veterans as well. You've got, I forget the actress's name off the top of my head, but in the scene around the dinner table when they're doing the calypso, one of the female characters is the same actress that plays Patty in Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I mean, there's just so much coolness to this movie. Long story short, incredibly simple couple, just living their life on vacation, die in an accident, and have to kind of learn how now to live dead, and are trapped in their house as a weird family takes over their house to living there, and they kind of want to find a way to get them out of the house while they befriend their daughter with, you know, and then eventually unlock this mischievous entity, very much like a Loki, that they don't put back, and he's just causing all kinds of havoc. Considering the name of the movie, the star character of the movie is in the movie for like 7 minutes.
Yeah, and I love the fact that, like, okay, so everywhere you see his name in this movie, it's, it's obviously the spelling is, with the
Beetlegeist.
GE, yeah, the Goose, or however you want to look at it. And I get it, because when the spelling is like, okay, I understood that's probably the reason why they decided to name the, because his name is actually spelled Beetlejuice, but with Geuse, like that. But obviously, if Tim Burton would have named the movie that, people would be like, Beetlegoose, 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 guys. It'd be everybody trying to figure out what the hell. So it made sense being, obviously naming it Beetlejuice and stuff like that. I thought it was kind of funny that there were rumors that, instead of saying his name 3 times, it said, like, sort of like in the Candyman lore that we found
Yeah.
out later, that they at one time they were going to make it a running joke that it was like 7 or something, like 6 or 7 times. It was like, oh my God, that Beetlejuice, 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 Beetlejuice. I mean, yeah, it makes more sense, because 3 times is kind of like you could accidentally say Beetlejuice 3 times and not intentionally mean it. Where if you're saying it 6 to 7 times, then there's definitely, you're not accidentally conjuring this guy. But like I said, I love the fact, Michael Keaton, obviously plays this, and watching it and knowing about it and learning and stuff like that too, you can obviously know that a lot of it's not scripted. Tim just let Keaton just go full balls to it. You know what I mean? It's just do whatever he want. Say the weird stuff, do the kooky stuff and stuff like that. And even like I said, obviously everybody knows that Beetlejuice. They can't eventually made the sequel with Beetlejuice, but the fact that he's such a a character that, even looking nowadays with all the, the woke community and all the you can't do this, you can't say that. I mean, Beetlejuice is like, he doesn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? He's just one of those guys. I mean, he's basically like trying to marry a 15-year-old girl the whole entire time. He's like,
Right.
even when they first meet him, the whole entire time he's sexually assaulting, Gina Davis's character the whole entire time, by grabbing her and doing stuff. It's just like very inappropriate, and, and then, just all the crazy kooky stuff. But like the main things that I always remember about Beetlejuice that I always thought was super super funny was two things. I mean, one thing we'll talk about a little bit, but it was like, everybody knows about the book, the handbook for the recently diseased. I mean, deceased. But anyway, I always loved that, like, at the very, end of the movie, when you people, because obviously if we shouldn't have to talk about what this whole entire movie. If you haven't seen Beetlejuice, like you said, you've been living in a freaking stone cave for the rest of your life, because there's not a person who's 80 to 5 years old who doesn't know who freaking Beetlejuice is.
TV alone shows that movie
Yeah.
on a crazy level.
So, but the thing about the book that I thought was kind of weird was, yeah, there's a chapter about how to bring the dead back to the life, to be the dead, to kind of kill them again. Like, obviously with the wedding scene and him killing them, and Otho's like, oh shit, I don't know how to fix this, and how they're dying. I'm like, why would there be a chapter of that in the book? It'd be kind of weird.
Yeah.
But the main thing that I always laughed at me, and which, I put in my notes, which probably makes no sense to you, and this is why I'm going to explain it, is the closet scene in the theaters. The only reason why I put that, and you're probably like, closet scene in the theaters. I remember going to see this because the movie came out in 1988. I remember going to see this in theaters, and friends of mine were there and they were back seat. And I remember turning around right at the scene where Barbara rips off her face in the closet, bah! and I was not paying attention to the screen, and everybody in the theater was like, ah, screaming like they just seen Bloody Mary. I turn around, obviously that scene's already over, so I have no idea what the hell scared everybody. So when the first time I saw that on VHS when it came out, I was like this the whole entire time because I had no idea what was gonna happen, but I remember everybody screaming and scared, and I was like, and then realized, oh, that wasn't that bad. Why the fuck was everybody else screaming like a bunch of bitches in the theater? Like, it was a cool. I'm like, but I didn't know. I figured it was something super graphic or scary that everybody in the theater was going. So that was always one of my favorite things about Beetlejuice. I just love it because, like you said, it's so kooky, so crazy. I'm a huge fan of everybody in that movie. Like I said, even though we did talk a little bit about the dad, with him going, doing the things that he probably shouldn't done. I'm not condoning any of the stuff that he does,
Nope.
and I'm not saying that this guy is the greatest guy, but I still love a lot of the movies that he's been in, and I'm
Me
still
too.
going to be fans of his movies. I'm not really a fan of him per se anymore, which is another reason when we talk about Beetlejuice, of him not being in it. But as I said, I just love the fact that this movie is like that. I was a huge fan of the cartoons growing up.
Oh,
I actually probably liked the cartoon more than I liked the movie. I was just a huge fan of watching the Beatles. I remember I'm watching this, every morning when it came out. So I was a huge fan of just Beetlejuice, and he's such a cool character. It's just a cool movie. It's that like dark side humor where like the football players go, "Hey, man, I don't think we survived that bus ride." And they're like, "Hey, no,
how
no
did you
shit.
guess?
How'd you guess?" It's such, how do I look? They look pretty good. I don't know. I'm feeling kind of flat. Or like, the girl, like, this is what happens when you die. That's what happened. If I would have known that, I wouldn't have done my mistake. It's such dark humor, but not
Yeah,
to a point where where movies nowadays do a little bit of dark humor with like the Shaun of the Dead and things like that,
yeah,
where it's dark humor, but it's still in that family friendly. Even though it's like I said, it's more towards teenagers. Beetlejuice is definitely more of a teenager kind of film.
yeah.
But I mean, I was young watching it, but yeah, it's still family friendly enough. Even though he says "nice fucking model," honk honk.
Hong Kong. And it is funny though, Devil, too, because like in the movie again, you talk about like, you know, Beetlejuice basically kind of being like a sex addict and kind of like a molester. And then in the cartoon show, he and Lydia are like homies. Like they
Yeah.
just kick it together all the time. They're best friends.
Yeah, it's still kind of weird that he's like a grown ass adult and he's hanging out with. She's even younger in the cartoon, but at least in the cartoon, he's not trying to like marry her and be
Exactly.
her husband.
Totally. But I mean, the movie's awesome. It's so fun. I mean, yeah, there's so much dark humor. It's definitely very Tim Burton. But I also love the fact that the cast themselves love that movie so much that parts of it infiltrated their real lives. Like the actor that played Otho,
Yeah,
passed away from an illness.
Glenn Shaddix.
Yeah, passed away from an illness. He put in his will that he wanted, Harry Belafonte's Day-O, the Banana Song, played at his funeral, and that's exactly what happened. And I just love the fact that the cast cared so much about that movie. Not only like I said with things infiltrating their real lives, but also again when we get there, a lot of the players came back for the sequel movie, which was super, super cool. But let's go from the ghost with the most, my friend, and let's dive a little bit into comic books there, my friend.
Yeah, yeah, it's like that's what I said. So there's gonna be, there's a running theme when we talk about. Obviously, everybody knows we haven't gotten to the main player of Tim Burton films. Like, yes, all the women out there, we're gonna talk about Johnny Depp. Of course, we're gonna talk about good old Johnny Depp, or like V Neil said herself, that her Johnny.
Yep, but before there was Jack Sparrow, there was a different kind of Jack.
Yeah, but anyway, so he used a lot of these same actors and stuff like that. So you're gonna obviously we're gonna just mention these guys a million times and stuff like that. You're gonna get tired of it. But yeah, if you didn't know, you're gonna know by now that Tim Burton pretty much uses 99% of the same people a lot of times in his films. But anyway, this was the first one of a repeat because you
Yes.
got Michael Keaton bringing on Batman. And who doesn't love some Batman? And I love, and like I said, I mean, yes, there are things about these Batmans, and then they can continue on with the Joel one. We always talk about because they mix those in. The Joel two with the Batman, the bat nipples and all that kind of stuff like that. But everybody, but the Nolan
Yeah,
Batmans, I mean, when it came back into the no other ones and stuff like that. But
for
everybody
sure.
kind of like realized that, like, yeah, Tim Burton was the first person in the world to have said this and to admit to this, that he was never a huge Batman fan. He didn't know much about Batman. He knew it was a big IP. It was a big thing. Obviously they asked him for it. He's like, hell yeah, why wouldn't I do this? This is gonna be huge. And obviously, like I said, a lot of people in this, you want to talk about stuff like that, and they're like that when they do the Joker, it's definitely even though he's more comical, you can definitely tell it's based off the Killing Joker. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just very, because that was the one thing that Tim Burton did know a little bit about that and stuff like that. But I remember, like, a lot of people don't realize, and I always say this, people will go, "Oh yeah, who's the greatest Batman?" And I remember before, well, people have different Batmans. If you're a certain age, if you're probably in your late 50s or older, you're probably an Adam West person. That's going to be your Batman. If you're probably in your 20s or your 30s or so, you're probably going to either, go with, the Nolan ones, or you can go Patterson or Ben Affleck or any of those guys. If you grew up in the 80s, in the mid 80s to 90s,
it's
anybody asks you
Michael
who your
all day.
Batman is, Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton is our Batman. But there was such a controversy of people not wanting him to be a Batman. Nobody wanted him to play Batman.
Yeah,
Nobody thought that he was the kind of actor that should play that, because he's always been known for those more comical roles, those more serious kind of roles, and those are things they thought he was too kooky to be, maybe be the Joker, but not Batman. But then again, he proved everybody wrong. Like I said, he's my one. And then obviously you got Jack Nicholson, who another one you can say, I mean, like I said, it really all depends on opinions. Who's your favorite Joker? Some people are gonna go, um the Nolan ones with Heath Ledger and stuff like that.
yeah.
Some people are gonna go, with the old school ones and stuff like that. But Jack,
Ces-
I always love
Cesar.
Jack. Yeah, with Cesar Romero, and people are gonna go. It's all opinions. I mean, I love Jack. I thought Jack was an awesome Joker, and I think that's just it's such a fun character. Even though, like I said, the precursor to this is that it's a lot different than the comic books. You know what I mean? Obviously, the Batman story is somewhat similar. Bruce Wayne obviously loses his father and mother and get killed, but the Joker didn't kill them in the comic books. That's different. But anyway, let's talk about Batman.
Absolutely, for sure. But it's a cool movie. It's a lot of fun. Kim Basinger is great in the movie. I really thought as Vicky Vale, she did a really, really cool, character. She's playing this reporter who's like trying to get the story, and how deep is she gonna go, to get the story,
She goes deep. She goes
she
Batman balls deep.
she goes Batman balls deep. That way she definitely does, but you're also not pulling the wool over the eyes of Batman either, as Batman, did a little bit of deep dive with the hand to get the film to
Yep.
to stop her from being able to publish certain photos and stuff like that. But no, I loved her portrayal of Vicky Vale. And probably, and for the longest, and the funny thing is, for the longest time when it came to the Batman franchise, the most common player was actually Alfred Pennyworth.
Yeah.
Because I believe it's what was it, Alfred Molina? I think something like in that
Yeah, I don't remember what his name
ballpark.
was.
I forget the actor's name, Fangs Inferno, so forgive me on that one. But anyway, the actor that plays Alfred, did all four of what you consider, the main
I think
Batman
him
movies.
and the guy who played Commissioner Gordon were the same two actors for the two Burtons and the two Schumacher ones.
I think you're right. I
I
think you're
think
right.
I think he might have
I
been the
have to
same
double
guy.
check on Commissioner Gordon, but obviously Alfred Pennyworth for
Well,
sure,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Alfred was
100%.
definitely the same.
But that movie, it's so cool. I mean, I love the, the way that they did Batman's vehicles. The weapons made sense. The Joker comedy stuff, like pulling out the massively long gun out of his trousers and stuff like that to take down, Batman's flying plane. All the way up to the fight scene. Bob the Goon, such an awesome character. I love him. I've seen that actor in a bunch of other stuff, even something as simple as Matilda with Paul Rubens, because he was
Yeah.
with Pee Wee Herman for that movie. But I love the Bob the Goon character, and there's the scene, one of my favorite scenes to this, because we're going to speak lots about Danny Elfman. But one of the things that's actually incredibly cool about this movie is the soundtrack was actually done pretty much entirely by Prince, and including um, the museum, the
Yeah.
museum scene
Yeah.
where
The
Joker kills everybody, and then he's defacing and destroying a bunch of the art pieces while Prince is playing on a jukebox. I mean, not
yeah.
a jukebox, a boombox,
Boombox.
the goon's shoulders. So it's a really cool movie. It's a great interpretation, and from a guy who's not a Batman guy, it also shows that, like, Tim's smart. He'll do what research he needs to do, play off of his familiarities or strengths, things like the Killing Joke, but also understanding that it's not a Killing Joke specific movie, because there's no references to Red Hood, obviously no parallelization of Commissioner of Barbara Gordon, um, and stuff like that. But it's just a really cool interpretation. And that leads us into our next movie and the debut of a guy we're going to talk about, of course, a lot. And we're going to talk about her Johnny Depp. But for right now, we're going to make him our Johnny Depp as he debuts one of, honestly, the most iconic characters that, in my opinion, is out there, because there is one look. Everybody knows what it is, from the scars to the full strapped in bodysuit, the crazy Tim Burton-ish type hair, and of course, the blades, the scissors, and that is Edward Scissorhands, my guy.
Oh yeah, like I said, like you said before, when you got, obviously this is the first time Burton is working with. It might be the only time. I think this is the only Johnny Depp movie I think that Tim Burton did with him. I'm not 100% sure. We'll figure that out
He
later.
played the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, and of course Sleepy Hollow.
But anyway, obviously, yeah, we're talking about bringing back characters. But you bring back actresses. You bring back Winona Ryder
Yep.
in this movie, which is kind of funny though. Okay, so I'm gonna say this kind of oddly, but I've always like obviously loved Winona Ryder. Her character in Beetlejuice is probably the type of character of girls that I would have dated at that point because of me liking the goth girls and stuff. But to
Yeah.
me, honestly, her and Edward Scissorhands, I think she looks the best out of all the movies she ever did. I love her. I'm not majorly a blonde person,
Mhm.
blonde lover, but I just loved her look. I love the fact that she was kind of like a campy cheerleader, but
Yeah.
she wasn't like selfish like that. I love the, like the typical, cheerleader that, obviously is like too better. I mean, she starts off that way,
Yeah.
obviously she's dating, which is funny,
The nerd from
Michael.
the Breakfast Club, for fuck's
Yeah,
sake.
yeah, it's Michael C. Hall, fucking, he just a couple years ago he just put brawl over his head and brought a girl back, made a weird science girl. Now all of a sudden he's this big bully guy he's such an asshole in this movie. He plays such a good asshole in this movie. It's amazing. Yeah, he probably took all those years of being bullied because he was scrawny, and now
Yeah.
in Edward Scissorhands, and when you see him now, obviously in the new Halloween movies and stuff like that, Michael C. Hall, if you've ever, I'm not Michael C. Hall, almost said, I always say his name is Michael C.
Anthony
Hall.
Michael Hall.
Anthony Michael Hall, those guys, that their names just drive me insane. But you see him at
Me too, Devil.
cons, and he's a big guy, he's
Yeah.
jacked. You would never believe that, obviously because you watched it, but if you've seen, those older movies like The Breakfast Club and like you said, the Weird Science, he's such a nerdy, scrawny little piece of meat. He's nothing. And now,
I recognized his name for Edward Scissorhands, but I did by no means did I put two and two together, though,
yeah,
that
exactly.
was the same skinny kid.
Yeah. And then, of course, what's not to love about Edward, with, in Edward Scissorhands, the mom, our favorite lover of vampires.
We will get her, dude.
I love that. And then, what's not else to add? Who added? It's like, with Tim Burton loving the fact that he's like, this old school cat and loves that old school horror and that old school time Hollywood, brings out, Vincent Price basically in the last
Yep.
cinematic role that he's ever gonna do. And most people, you know, like I said, most people who are Vincent, I wouldn't go say huge Vincent Price fans, but most people who think of Vincent Price, unless you're an old school cat and love those old movies, those, like, The Mask of the Red Death and all those. I mean, I'm a huge
Yeah.
Vincent Price fan. A lot of people, there's two things that most people who grew up in the 80s, the early 90s are going to know Vincent Price from: the Thriller video, and oh, he isn't he the guy who made Edward Scissorhands?
You're right, absolutely. And just because it got it got some legs as horror is, and I think the Thriller video actually had something to do with this. I'll even throw in House on Haunted Hill. Like
Yeah.
because like that movie in particular out of his catalog, it got some legs as like Vincent, and then of course into that people started being a little curious about his catalog. Like trust me, and maybe we explore this somewhere down the line because like I can go all day on Vincent Price movies. I'm
Oh
a big
yeah.
Tingler fan. I love House of Wax, Abominable Miss Dr. Fives, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Not to get off on a tangent, but yeah, I'll throw in House on Haunted Hill for that as well. But absolutely, the voice in Thriller and the guy who made Edward Scissorhands. And but it's so cool though for Tim Burton. Again, of course, I wish we still had Vincent with us to this day, but it's very, very cool that for him to have a final film, for it to be a Tim Burton film, I do think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it kind of becomes a reigning theme as a, in some of the stuff like that. But yeah, yeah, like you said with Vincent, Vincent Price and stuff like that. I love the fact that's that. And like again, it's another one of these movies that, I mean, it's such a weird movie that like people who are horror fans or like, you know, metalheads and these like masculine men type stereotype film. If you go and tell somebody the premise of they've never seen Edward Scissorhands and you tell them like the premise of this film, right? There's this guy who is weird and has knives for his hands, and it's a but it's a story about being an outsider, and it's a love story. It's a very romantic love story. You're gonna be like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
Because it definitely sounds like an 80s rom-com. It definitely has a lot of those 80s rom-com themes in it, but it's such a beautiful movie. And then like you said, we've talked about with Danny Elfman and stuff like that, adding in with the music. I don't care what anybody says, and I will die on the hill, and I don't even care if anybody knows it. Watching the scene with Winona Ryder twirling around in the snow is
Dude.
brings any guys to tears. It's
Yeah.
such an iconic scene, and it's so beautifully shot. The music is it's like it just takes you like to another place. And like I said, it's one of those ones where you're gonna get goosebumps every time you watch it. I don't care if you've seen Edward Scissorhand once or a million times. That scene is just like chokes you up because it's such a beautiful scene, and then goes directly into what's kind of sort of bad scene with the downfall of like him finding out like people not really liking him as much, or this weird stuff where it's like, you know what I mean, he's got the boyfriend that doesn't want to do him, the the everybody in the town are going to do it because the one girl slept, all of a sudden he didn't want to sleep with her, and all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff like that. He tries to save the boy and kind of cuts him up because obviously, he's got hands. He just wants to make
And they
sure
were
he's all
basic
right.
and they were basically using him. I mean,
Yeah.
he's designing and cutting everybody's hedges and making this Crayola box of crayons looking town like really, really artsy and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, it basically just goes where, he just kind of retreats, and he was better off just kind of being alone, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like, it's better to love than to never love, or something like that. But it's like in this where it's like Yeah, he probably would have been better off. But then again, it makes him, a better character. I love the fact, and it's like I said, it's so sad. I mean, there's other stuff in that's sad. It's very sad when, Vincent's trying to make him in, and he's talking about his hands, and obviously, he dies of a heart attack and he falls on the floor and stuff like that. So it was
Right
like,
when he got his hands.
yeah, right when he was just getting ready to to have real hands and stuff like that. So it's such a like I said for being like a especially with Tim. There are a couple movies later on that when we talk about them will definitely give you those feels. But this was the first time out of all the other movies that he's done so far. With Pee Wee, with Batman, Beetlejuice, comedy kind of action, where this has got a little bit of that like kind of like you said that romantic kind of side, that softer side to him. And you could, even though it's still gothic and it still has a lot of those like dark themes and stuff like that, even like the lady that's in the town, demon, she's like calling him like this, succubus of the devil and
Yep.
all this stuff like that. I just love the fact that it's such an iconic movie that like again, it's another one of those ones, like you said, with Beetlejuice and stuff like that, that there's not a person in the world who probably, not even just horror fan, just a
Yeah.
person who just watches movies that doesn't know who at least Edward Scissorhands is, and at least
Right.
knows that what that character. Maybe they might not have seen the movies. There are people out there that maybe haven't seen it, but they at
Yeah.
least know who that character is, and it's just such an iconic character. And that's the one thing about Tim Burton as we're going on, that every movie that he does, for the most part, brings on an iconic character that's still throughout history and still talking about now with people with like cosplaying, or whether or not people have tattoos or things like that. I mean, I would venture to say that. I mean, I know it's probably a tough thing, especially in the horror community, but I would guarantee I would say that Tim Burton is probably, as far as any director in the world, that has probably predominantly more tattoos on people than anybody else. I mean,
I
like I said, and
definitely.
that's saying a lot because I mean, obviously everybody's got Freddy Krueger's and there's a lot of Halloweens and a lot of that. But I would say, like, even like I said, horror fans all have probably Tim Burton tattoo. People who don't even like horror films probably have Tim Burton somewhere on them, or if they don't, probably eventually will have some kind of Tim Burton thing on them. So it's just like, yeah, like I said, I don't know. I'd have to go and look in that information, but I definitely can see him being probably the most tattooed director as far as character wise.
Absolutely, for sure. And the movie, it's got a very interesting end to it. It's actually got this very kind of Beauty and the Beast style ending to the movie where you've got, the big macho guy with his lackeys trying to invade the castle, so to speak. And it doesn't go his way. But I also like the idea and the cover up of this movie where it's not so much that, boy meets girl and they end up together, because in this case they don't, but the idea of being from two different worlds is very, very forward and it's right up in your grill. But the fact that after there's the ability to save Edward, she is like, covers up as a fake death by using, one of his old, scissored hands from probably when Vincent was designing them, to show, nope, see, here's his severed hand, he's dead, to allow him to just be safe and stay behind. And her growing up where the snowfall every year, comes from one place, and that's Edward, continuing to make masterpieces and ice sculptures, and send snow out to the town and stuff to kind of let her know that he's always there and he's always around. And that brings us back to not only the return of similar casts and repeat offenders, but the return of course, another iconic character. And let's get back to a little bit more talk about Batman.
Oh yeah. So I mean, so yeah, it's kind of crazy. Tim Burton's always kind of said that he doesn't consider this a sequel because he doesn't do sequels. And as we're going through until we get to Beetlejuice, he really doesn't do sequels.
Yeah,
He's
it's
never been
true.
kind of a sequel guy. So and
Because
as we
even the movies that have sequels, he didn't do them.
yeah, and then like when it comes to to things that we've done here on the Vampire and Devil podcast. One of our categories that we always talk about is better sequels. I will die on the hill. I don't care what anybody says. I love Batman. I love first Batman movie.
Yep. Same.
I think Batman Returns is a better movie. I
It's really
love
cool.
Batman. I think it's just overall just a more fun movie. I love the actors that are in it. Obviously, I love Kim Basinger and as Vicky Vale, but who doesn't love Michelle Pfeiffer? Not
Bro.
only in this Michelle Pfeiffer smoking hot because this is the early '90s, putting her in a cat freaking suit the whole entire time in latex and letting her be naughty and licking people. Like, oh my god, I just want to be Batman for 5 seconds so I can have her lick me. But anyway, you have that, and obviously, you like I said, you're bringing back Keaton. You got DeVito as playing the Penguin, which is probably, I mean, I'm a huge Burgess Meredith fan, so I'm still gonna probably say that's my favorite Penguin. But I still
Yeah.
love Danny DeVito. I put him like just a little bit around there. But you have Christopher Walken in this movie.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have the return of Paul Rubens playing him and Simone from Pee Wee's Big Adventure playing the Penguin's parents. And then
Yeah.
also watching this because I completely forgot, even though I knew one of them, but I forgot about the second one. You got two V&D alumni in
Yep.
this
You
movie
do.
with Doug Jones. We
Yep.
met Doug Jones and got to talk to Doug Jones. But we also got our boy, which I didn't realize that I forgot about him being in this movie. You got Sean Whalen as the newspaper boy. That's like, holy shit. I forgot Sean
Right.
Whalen was in this movie. Not that
Totally.
he had a huge character in this movie, but I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I forgot that Sean was the newspaper boy in this. So that's kind of it's kind of fun, and I just love the fact that it's like I said, this was just a cool story. I love the Penguin aspect of it. I love the fact that you bring where in the first Batman you only had the Joker. This has got more of the two villains in this movie. So even though
Yeah.
Catwoman's sort of yeah, she could be a good person too, but she was predominantly a bad person. She was blowing up shit. I mean, granted,
Yeah.
most of the shit she was trying to piss and kill was because of Max Shrek. She wanted to, get back for her pushing her off there, but which is kind of weird too. That she's a cat. She has 9 lives, but I never under quite stood when she said that Batman killed her. I thought she fell into the kitty litter, which
She
wouldn't
was
have
saved
killed
by
you.
kitty litter.
So I didn't understand how that was considered a kill for some reason when she was down to her lives in this movie and stuff like that. But like I love the fact that, like you said, with that cat suit, I was learning about that. The amount of money that they cost to those cat suits were like $1,000 a piece, and they were so tight and so ill fitted that like they basically had to rip them to get her off of her, and
Yeah.
apparently went to 60 of those. So $60,000 of this budget for this movie went just for her catsuit outfits, which is insane.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely crazy. And again, you've got the repeat cast like we've talked about, with Penguin's parents being played by Tim Burton alumni. You've got, obviously, of course, Michael Keaton coming back, but that one's a given. But you get the debut, at least as far as the Burton universe, of Walker and DeVito, who both come back later down the line in separate movies and stuff like that. But you're definitely right on there when it comes to Batman Returns. I love Batman Returns. Like I'm a huge Joker fan. I mean, anybody who knows me knows how much I just love the Joker character. And Mrs. Vamp is a huge Harley Quinn fan. And I know that there has nothing to do with Tim Burton, but they're kind of a package deal. But I love the Joker so much. But dude, yeah, just the design of Batman Returns is just so much darker. It's so much more evil than the first movie, and that's just something I super duper love about the movie. And all the way down to just the way people were taken out, like the way Max was taken out, and you think it's the end of Michelle Pfeiffer's character. You think Catwoman's gone, but then I love the way that she reappears in a really cool way at the end of the movie. The idea of like Danny DeVito's Penguin, like being shunned by his parents, living as a recluse, then being kind of seen as this golden goose to just try to end up getting revenge on the town until slick little Batman, fucks it up for him by, showing, recording him and posting the real plans behind it to screw everything over. And, the combination of like real penguins and animatronic penguins, it's just, It's such a cool movie, man. It's so super duper fun. And something else that's just so super duper fun. And again, it's like I said, I will fight for this as part of my movies that I know you know and I know you like, whether you claim to be a fan or not. Dude, the epically iconic movie from the time it came out to definitely what it is established as now, The Nightmare Before Christmas.
No, yeah, I mean this is like a lot of people are gonna go, like I said, people love Beetlejuice, people love Edward Scissorhands. Most people, even though most people probably don't realize it and they consider it, even though we've talked about it with with Clive Barker that we did a lot of the movies that he directed, but he didn't really direct too many movies. He was more predominantly known as a writer. A lot of people I've always assumed, always put this as a Tim Burton film. Yes, it is a Tim Burton film because he
Yep.
wrote it, but he didn't direct this movie, and it's crazy too because you look at the guy who actually directed it, and his name was Henry Selick, which is pretty cool. A lot of people don't realize that he did like this. He did James and the Giant Peach, which is awesome. Did the
Love it.
Coraline, and even like James and the Giant Peach, those and Coraline, are very Tim Burton esque films. And so he has that same kind of feel. That's why a lot of people always thought that like, this movie or even like Coraline or even James and the Giant Peach, even though Tim Burton was a producer on it, a lot of people thought that it was very was a Tim Burton film, which it actually wasn't because it's very similar elements, the way that he shoots the stop time animation and things like that. But he also directed Monkey Bone, and I don't care what anybody says. It's a horrible movie, but I still love it. I love me some Monkey Bone movie. That movie's funny
That
as shit.
movie had to grow on me. The
Yeah,
first time I watched it, as much as I loved the style and the weird and kookiness of it, there still was a part of me that was like, this fucking thing, man. But that movie definitely grew on me.
yeah. But when it comes to Tim Burton, most people you say name a Tim Burton film. You say name a Tim Burton film. A lot of people are gonna go with Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, you got to realize. I mean, yes, granted, we are going out and selling some stuff. People are selling stuff that are, Edward Scissorhands here in a little while. You have the Beetlejuice now because of the Beetlejuice. This is a Tim Burton film that from the time it was made in 1993 to now, you can go to any store every year and buy Nightmare Before Christmas stuff. It's probably the most marketed film as far as Tim Burton is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an iconic. I love it. Obviously,
And all year round
all
too.
year
That
around too. Yeah,
like
exactly. And then like I said, you got some of those cast characters. Obviously, they're actors. You got Danny Elfman, obviously doing the singing voice, and there's he was obviously did the score, and like as when we get a little bit further on, there was a little bit of a heatedness between him and Tim for a little bit because Tim didn't really like his voice for it. So obviously they got Chris Sarandon to do the actual talking voice for Jack. But I mean, you got them, and you got this, and you've got Chris Sarandon doing that, which is a new guy. But you have Catherine from Beetlejuice coming back and doing voices. You got Paul Rubens doing voices for it. You got Glenn Shaddix that we've talked about before. With Otho doing voices for it. So even a movie where like I said, it's not directed by Tim Burton, but it just has voices. He brings a lot of those characters and those actors to do the voices for that. And like I said, a lot of people didn't realize that, like, even when it came to singing, like Catherine was like, "Yo, no, I love singing. I'm a singer. I like singing and things like that. So I love it, and it's still funny. Like even when I still watch it now, when I watch it, I love the fact that they call it Sandy Claus instead
yeah,
of Santa Claus the whole entire time. And it's just like I said, it's such an iconic movie,
yeah,
especially because the fact that it's like, you know, the amount people don't realize, especially if you watch. I mean, I implore anybody to buy the collector's edition version of this and watch the making of it
yeah.
because the fact that nowadays
Amazing.
you're not going to get this stuff now it's the reason why we went Disney. If you see anything that looks like a stop time animation film now, it's all digitally done now. It's not where this was done with models changing heads frame
Yeah,
by
like
frame. Yep.
moving like
Yeah. I mean, frame by frame, taking hours and hours and months and years to literally make an hour plus movie. It's insane. That's why nobody does it now because it's just not feasibly. There's no reason now, especially with the way technology it is now. But it's something still doesn't beat that though. I love the fact that stop time animation is just amazing in it. And then, like I said, I've always been a musical guy. It's a musical film. I love all the songs in it. I've sung
so good.
along with them. I love the fact that it's sing along. I've seen this movie 9 billion times. I could probably tell you it in and out. But then I thought that was true, and then about like 20, 15 years ago or so, they came out with the Nightmare Before Christmas 3D version. So I was like, okay, cool. That'd be cool to see this in 3D. Uh, and in watching it, they added shit that they've never put in any of the versions. Even still nowadays, you can't even find that. I mean, I think they may have come out with a 3D version that you might be able to buy. I don't even know if the physical one ever came out. But there are songs and scenes. I'm like, the fuck is this? I've seen this
Yeah,
movie 9 billion times. I've never seen this scene in my entire life. Finding out, like, yeah, they had some extra stuff that they never put into it that got cut and they added it to the 3D-ness. But yeah, it's just like I said, it's one of those ones, like, I mean, there's, like I said, especially with the tattoo world, when we were talking about Tim Burton being tattooed,
yeah.
Nightmare Before Christmas is probably out of all of Tim Burton films is probably the most heavenly one. I'm not saying other people don't have other movies
Oh, of
of his,
course.
but definitely character wise, there's somebody out there that that has at least, you know, Oogie Boogie Man, Sally, Jack, maybe the three kids, and stuff like that. There's
I've got the
always
dog Zero right
yeah,
on my
zero.
wrist.
Yeah, you got zero. It's just like I said, it's one of those ones where it's like you would think it's so crazy because it's a movie that like I said, that all generations of people, old and young, love. It's just people know about that movie, and it's just like it's insane that now talking about, especially because there's never been a remake of it. There's never been like a sequels of it. It's a movie that came out in 1993. Like I said, that is now that kids now who are probably 5 years old or less still know what that movie is. It's
Oh,
insane that movie is that big and that iconic. Which you
oh,
know why Disney kind of brought Tim back into the fold because they're like,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, this guy. Maybe we want to add him into our collections of people
This
we
guy's
like to
got
work
some
with
magic.
again.
This guy's got some magic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that movie's so great. I love it to death. The songs are so great. Shout out to Oogie Boogie, to the late Ken Page, who we actually just lost within the last year. So that was super duper unfortunate. But yeah, I mean the characters are so great. The songs are so great. There's a version, there's a 2 disc set of the soundtrack paired with a covers album. And oh my God, do I love the Marilyn Manson? This is just ironic. It's the shirt I chose to wear for this episode. But oh my God, Marilyn Manson's version of This Is Halloween is so good. But
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
The crazy story about the Marilyn Manson one is like when they were making the soundtrack for this and that the updated soundtrack. Danny at that time Marilyn Manson quit music. He
yeah,
didn't want to do music anymore. He got tired of the fucking industry. And Danny Elfman basically personally said, "No, you are doing a version of this song because anybody who's going to do an updated version, you're the first person that I think of that would be perfect to do a version of this." And then he did that version and it's fucking amazing. And
so
it's
good.
like, it's so awesome. And then even like I said, even, our friends, shout out to Raven Black,
Yeah,
doing This Is Halloween, you
totally.
know what I mean? So it's like it's so great. Like I said, those songs are so iconic in this film.
Manson's version is still my ringtone.
Yeah.
And I also personally happen to really enjoy Jack's song done by Fall Out Boy.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that, or not Jack's song. What's this?
Yeah.
I really like the Fall Out Boy version of that. I think that's really really excellent. But yeah, man, I mean, just like you said, Devil, everything from like somebody who was like a barely with us child then when the was released. Now, they could have been 3 years old then. and they're going to be, 22 year, 22, 25, whatever it is now. Like they know it now. Everybody definitely knows it. Just like you said, easily the most heaviest like marketing. 365. There is Nightmare Before Christmas stuff somewhere. And I'm not
Yeah,
just talking about
exactly.
like Gothic stores or Hot Topic or Spencer's. You can find it in Walmart, Forever 21. It is definitely around in all of those places. But absolutely, God, love that movie so much. Love Nightmare Before Christmas.
No, yeah, yeah. Especially when you're talking about it, like it's like I said, with it being like that. I mean, yeah, you can watch it around the Halloween time and stuff like that. But I would probably put it as, other than probably the Christmas Story, it's probably the secondly most watched, Christmas movie of all time. Just because I love it. Like I said, it's so fun because, like, yeah, you can watch it. That's the good thing about it. You can watch it anytime. But you
Yep.
can. Is it a Christmas movie? You always joke around about the Die Hard. Is it a Christmas movie or not? You know, Nightmare After Christmas. Is it a Christmas movie? Is it a Halloween movie? It's a Holo Christmas movie.
Yeah, because and the funny thing about it is it kind of like strikes into different zones because not taking the horror genre out of this. When it comes to Halloween, I would say it's probably the top two or three most watched Halloween movies next to the original Halloween and Hocus Pocus.
Yeah,
Like,
that and maybe the Peanuts, the
oh
Peanuts
yeah,
Halloween one.
it's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie
Great
Brown.
Pumpkin. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's a good one too, Devil, for sure, man. Absolutely. So, absolutely. Nightmare Before Christmas, definitely some serious staying power, and that movie is just so great. As we continue on, Devil, the one thing that's a lot of fun about this one is it's common knowledge to the Fangs and Infernos how much we love our Charles Bands, our Lloyd Kaufmans, our Full Moons, our Trauma. And the thing about Charles and Lloyd is you kind of can't have one without the other. They play off of each other. Those types of movies are their own kind of thing. But they also tie into this conversation as well, because there's a very good possibility that without our next movie, there, my friend, we don't have Lloyd or Charles at all. So I
Yeah.
feel it only a little necessary for us, to get a little erect as we talk about the great and the since past, quite past, but that's not the point. Ed Wood.
Yeah, yeah, and right before we start getting into Ed Wood, you're talking about people who just passed. As the recording of this today, we just got the news that the behold, horror fans all together, as far as like, what kind of music you like, horror fans in general, whether you're a country horror fan, you're a metal horror fan, a horror fan that likes metal, like country, like rap, you like pop, you like whoever. If you're a horror fan, you love Ozzy Osbourne. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately today we lost Ozzy Osbourne, so wanted to give a quick little shout out, as of this recording, that we give our love out to the Osbournes, and we're excited to hear what heavenly music Randy Rhoads and Ozzy are gonna write together now that they're back together again. So just wanted,
Absolutely.
as we talk about the late Ed Wood, I just wanted to give a little quick shout out to the Oz man.
100%. I mean, think about it, Devil, as a full reuniting as well, because they wrote a lot of music together. How about this for a starting of a band of reunion with Ozzy, Randy, and Lemmy?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we've lost, throughout the years we definitely have lost a lot of good musicians, but that Ozzy, even though, like I said, a lot of, like, a lot of people know Black Sabbath and stuff like that. I grew up primarily listening to Ozzy's solo stuff. That's what I first got into when I
Same.
met Ozzy, especially like the Bark at the Moon. That's where I get to that horror, where it's like that was horror metal right there perfectly. Him in the full werewolf gear and just the craziness, and then you find out about him biting a bat and doing all the other shit that happened. It's like, like I said, every person out there, I'm pretty sure, whether or not, even if they're not a metalhead or a rock head, if they're a horror fan, they probably at one point in their life loved an Ozzy song, just because he was such a iconic man. It just went from all over the place. But yeah, I figured we just give a little quick little shout out to the shout out to the devil and shout out to to Ozman and give him our love. But like you were saying though, back into the Tim Burton and Ed Wood thing. Yeah, it's funny, you talk about these people like Charles Band and like you said Lloyd Kaufman. You talk about the late great Ed Wood. The first time I ever met Lloyd Kaufman, I told him I was like, we were going up to him, we were trying to figure out, it was like one of the first time doing cons. I was at a friend of mine's video store, and he was kind of like, "What are we supposed to do?" I'm like, "I don't really know, man." Like, kind of thing. And it was just like, "Well, I got something I want to tell you." He's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, man, shoot." And I was like, "You're my generation's Ed Wood," and he was like, "Oh my God, that's the greatest thing that anybody's ever said to me in my entire life," because that's exactly what Lloyd does. Lloyd
Yep.
makes shit, low budget, B-rated movies. I mean, come on. I mean, I mean, come on. Tromeo and Juliet, Class of Nukem High. I mean, you can't take, any of the shit that he does seriously. And the same thing with Ed Wood. Ed Wood didn't care. Ed Wood was like, dude, I'm going to make all these B-rated movies. I don't give a shit. I'll use stock footage. I'll use people that doing like that. I'll bring Vampira over here. I'll resurrect and eventually he ends up dying and having the last film, but resurrecting sort of Bela Lugosi's career for a little while,
Yeah.
again. And it's just those, like I said, those just B campy, like if you're into, even if you're not even really into Ed Wood in general, as far as a lot of his backstories, like Glenn and Glenda, or stuff like that, whether or not you're not into some of the other movies that he's did, everybody knows Plan 9 from Outer Space. I mean, that's just and it's so horrible, which is funny because that's probably the creme of the creme when it comes to Ed Wood films. Unfortunately, that is the gold standard best Ed Wood movie there is
And
out
it's
there.
universally panned as like the worst movie ever. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't necessarily know if I feel like I can find something worse. I really do. But as far as if we're basing it off of the criteria of an established director, not some poor film student trying to make it or some director that's not yet made it or whatever, yes, I'm willing to bet that we can probably find a movie out there that's worse than Plan 9 from Outer Space. However, if we are keeping it in the criteria of established filmmakers, established directors, yeah, it's universally panned as the worst movie ever made.
Yeah, it's funny
But
too
I
because
love
it's
Vampira.
oh yeah, I mean I love Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's so
Really?
horrible, but it's so great, so cheesy. And that's the thing, like I said, about the Ed Wood movies. It's funny, even this Tim Burton one, they said the amount of money that Tim spent to make Ed Wood movie about this doc about Ed Wood was more money than all the movies combined, even including inflation from obviously from the time period and stuff
Yeah.
like that too, to like to the 90s or so, like, yeah, what, it was 94 when this came out. Even with inflation, it was still, you probably over budgeted by like 99% because it's basically like, low key kind of thing. And that's what I love about that. You got, you got Johnny Depp again, back again, playing Ed Wood. You've got, Martin Landau playing Bela Lugosi, which I love. I think he plays such an amazing Bela Lugosi. A
Won
lot
an
of
Oscar
people,
for it.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people didn't like it. Apparently, family members and people didn't really like because it showed the dark side of of his, obviously with his drug abuse and stuff like that. But they also said that he didn't really swear very much. So, but I'm like, hey, whatever. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure, when Hollywood's always gonna have to, push things out a little bit. But I mean, I always loved this movie. I always thought it was a fun movie. I always loved the fact that it's just, it's just so it's funny when when you do these kind of movies about somebody like that, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, it's without Ed Wood there wouldn't be like those Roger Cormans and those like we said, these Lloyd Kaufmans and these guys that made these cheesy horror films and stuff like that. But like I said, with Tim Burton, we've talked about it before. This is you got to mention that this is the first movie that's not scored by Danny Elfman. Like I said, they had that little bit of a falling out for the previous movie, the Nightmare Before Christmas, about,
Yeah.
him, being able to do the vocals versus, him doing the voice, the regular voice for Jack, and had a little bit of feud, and stuff like that. But I mean, who doesn't love this movie? And like I said, I love Vampire. I'm not gonna shit on Vampire. I think it's funny that, people who know about Vampire, she went after, Elvira for trying to like steal her stick. She lost. I mean, I'm an Elvira fan. If I had to choose between which one I like better, I'm always gonna pick Elvira over Vampire.
Same.
I like Vampire, but I love Elvira. But being an Elvira fan, yeah, she did steal a little bit of her shtick. I mean, it's good looking. The tall, the dress, the big boobs. You know what I mean, like that. And I love the fact that you had Lisa Marie coming in here and playing that.
Yeah.
I thought she played a really good role. For that. Her and Tim Burton were. I'm not sure if they were dating at this time, but I know at one point they did date for a little while. So obviously, you're going to throw your girlfriend in there, which, eventually we'll talk about that later on when it comes to the next girlfriend that Tim has. But for right now, we're going to talk a little bit about, Lisa Marie. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, the movie's fun. I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
great movie. Like I said, it's weird. Like I said, about extra stuff with Ed Wood, kind of being that guy that liked wearing women's clothing, but
Yeah.
and people thought he was a little funny, in a funny way. But he
Yeah.
just was, he was a man that just liked wearing women's clothing since he was a kid. His mom dressed him and stuff because he wanted a girl, and like, even though he was 100%, heterosexual, he didn't like women. He just liked wearing women's clothing, and apparently, the girl, like you see in the movie, the girl doesn't like it.
Yeah.
Finds himself a new girlfriend, in the Arquette, and
Yep.
obviously, she didn't care. He's like, oh, so you like wearing that? You still like girls, right? Yeah. All right, cool.
We're good.
We're good.
No, absolutely. It was always like documented that he had girlfriends that were just kind of cool with it, but then he had, the one that it was just a deal breaker for. And I mean, it's a really cool movie. It's really well designed. I love the way that it's written. I like Sarah Jessica Parker's character quite a bit, and I don't fancy myself the world's biggest Sarah Jessica Parker
Yeah,
fan.
me neither.
There are notable exceptions. I mean, of course, everybody knows my love affair of Hocus Pocus, and I think Sarah was absolutely fantastic, as Sarah in Hocus Pocus. And I love that movie, and I always will. But yeah, I mean, I just don't particularly fancy myself a Sarah Jessica Parker fan, but I thought she did well. I thought I find it very amusing that like, there's an insult thrown her way in this movie that kind of became a Sarah Jessica Parker like long time insult in the horse face thing, which I thought was actually particularly hilarious. But overall, it's such a cool movie. It's like this really well done deep dive as kind of like a biopic, a documentary that's not actually a documentary per se, because it's not a documentary. It's a movie about this person. But it's really really interesting. I like the way it's done. It and kind of like, you know, re-exploring this movie as well also really kind of reminded me about like how cool it would be if somebody really did a documentary, a proper documentary on Ed Wood and on his life. And there are kind of like little things out there with interviews of friends and family and things like that. But the thing that's kind of a bummer, though, about getting a real Ed Wood documentary is there's just about no one left to interview where you really can sit with them and be like, tell me about this, tell me about that. I think his lovers have just about all passed or are close to it. Obviously, Vampire is no longer with us. Bella's no longer with us. The problem is so many people from like that real time frame, um, would they just aren't really there. But you can even take somebody that's also in that director style as well that we didn't mention yet, and somebody like John Waters, who you
Yeah.
could damn sure tell was, inspired and by Ed Wood and Ed Wood's work and stuff. But overall, Devil, it's such a cool movie, man. I mean, I've always liked this movie, and it's cool also seeing Tim Burton do a movie that's like steeped a little bit more in like reality, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
as opposed to fantasy, which is kind of a proper segue, to be honest, because while we talked about Plan 9 from outer space, I think we just straight up need to go to outer space, man, because Devil, watch out! Mars is attacking!
Yeah, so kind of cursor to this into this, and I know it probably is not the greatest thing in life. People are probably going to go boo the devil. I mean, I've since let this movie grow on me a little bit more, but okay. So I'm going to precursor. First off, when I first saw this movie, it was the best thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Granted, I went to the theaters and seen this with a bunch of my friends, stoned as a mother, and was the funniest shit ever. We were annoying the hell out of everybody who was in that theater because we were laughing at everything. I found this movie the funniest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I laughed so hard, and it was like snot bubbles, and everybody was doing everything. And then I remember, when it came out on VHS and all that kind of stuff like that, I watched this and I was like, is this the same movie that I went and seen in the theaters? Obviously, I saw it not stoned, and I was like, okay. And then it took me a while. A lot of people were always like, "Oh, I love this movie, love this movie." I'm like, I was like, dude, this movie sucks. I can't stand it. I'm like, it was so. I mean, there's parts of it that I liked, but I was like, overall, this movie was stupid. Now, like, eventually, I've gotten a little bit more into it, a little bit more now. I still definitely, if I had to put probably, like we talked about earlier, if I had to do the bottom five of what my would be my for my picks with Tim Burton. This would probably be on my bottom five. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm shitting on this. It's because his filmography to me is like amazing. That like we said, it's gonna be tough to try to do that top five. But I would definitely, obviously something if you're doing a top five, something's got to be on the top. And obviously if you're doing the bottom five, you're gonna have to put something. Doesn't necessarily mean that those are bad.
Yeah.
It's just that you have to have a spot for that. So I was like, same thing with this, man. But I mean, it's fun. It's a fun movie. You got a lot of the players coming back. You got like Jack. You got Lisa Marie back into it again. You've got a whole bunch of new kind of characters like Pearson Bronson, Dan DeVito's coming back, but you got Martin Short, and you got all these cool, funny things about it. And the funny thing I love about that I read about, that I didn't know, now it's even more funnier, is that when they were making this movie, obviously with Jack Nicholson, they were like, yeah, Jack Nicholson is such a big actor now. You're not supposed to kill him. Which kind of like is funny that they said that to Tim Burton for two reasons. One, he's already killed Jack.
Yep.
Obviously the Joker has died in Batman. And then two, he was like, you know what? I'm not supposed to kill this guy. He's a leading man, whatever. Fuck you. I'm gonna make two characters, have him play two characters in this movie. The president and then some weird, Las Vegas, gambler kind of like casino owner guy, scumbag. And he's gonna kill both of them.
Yes, for sure. And it's crazy, dude. But yeah, there's so many. Yeah, you've got the returning cast of characters. You've got new casts of characters, which is cool. I mean, you've got Jim Brown as he started getting into like acting outside of his football career. You've got Natalie Portman. And the crazy thing about that, well, the funny thing about that, to be honest, is this movie kind of sparked that whole awkwardly weird 90s like countdown to Natalie Portman becoming 18 thing. That was like really huge for some fucking reason, you
Yeah.
know. But I mean, look, Devil, we love pretty things, man. We can appreciate, good-looking females and pretty girls, but like countdowns to being legal, nah, it's just not my thing. Not our jam. Not on this show. But she's now a super adult, so it's like you can kind of look back at it and jest now. But it was so fucking weird when it was going on. But no, it's a cool movie. Same thing with me. It's in my bottom five if we're doing a bottom five for Tim Burton. I enjoy the movie for what it is. It's funny, and Lisa Marie's character and like the way the whole like emperor comes in. That it's got I've got a soft spot for this movie because it gives me so much of that Killer Clowns from Outer Space feel to it. You know, for just the trying to negotiate with the killers, for them to just be like, bang. Like, it just has so much uniqueness to it and so much similarities to things like Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And the other thing, though, is what also kind of sparked my soft spot as well, or I should say reinforced my soft spot as well, is everybody knows how much I love the Misfits. And also, everybody knows specifically how much I love Michael Graves' era of the Misfits. And they did a Mars Attacks song on their album, and it's great. It's so fun. So there is a part of me that's like, a little bit more like, chummy with this movie again in later years, because I remember seeing it back in the day and being like, wow, this is bizarre. And I didn't see it under the influence. I saw it as is, but I still, just as a new experience, I was like, yeah, this is bizarre. And I was already established as a Tim Burton fan, but I kind of dug it. But then again, it did wane on me a little bit because I was like, it's just not that good though. But it's definitely stylistically a Tim Burton movie for sure. It's just not good. And then, especially when we get into like the next movie, which I'm not even gonna lie, is 100% gonna be in my top five. Um, it hurt a little bit more because I was like, God, that that movie was so good, and Tim gets back into that style to where it really made me feel like it was a Killer Clowns ripoff, and I was like, started to hate on it a little bit while still enjoying it enough. But then again, I really kind of got cemented with it again, and really just kind of stuck it in my pocket of like general happiness. You know what? I'm cool with this. Frankly, thanks to the Misfits. But look, it's a fun movie. It is what it is. It's damn sure not going to be everybody's cup of tea. But again, there's so many people like us that are into those crazy B-rate style movies of very bizarre campiness that probably swear by this movie. And we definitely get our fair share of Mars Attacks, representation at horror cons.
No, yeah, for sure. You know what I mean? It definitely is. And I'm like I said, like I said, it's definitely one of those ones for, that they say, different strokes for different folks kind of people. You know what I mean? It's definitely a Tim Burton film, but like I said, it's just kind of weird. It's one of those ones that you can kind of sleep on.
Yeah.
Speaking of sleeping, let's go into the next one you were talking about, which
Dude.
of course is the good old. Of course, I mean, obviously, it's like when you come into this one, if it especially with Vampire, it's more than likely going to be the number one film that he's probably going to put on there for multiple reasons. But the main reason was why not? It's about Salem, and it's about dead things, and it's about the Hollows, and it's about the guys with no heads riding on horses and having sharp teeth and little kids kill them. Yes, we're talking about Sleepy Hollow. Yes, we're
Going to
talking
be at
about
least number two. It's not
yeah,
going to take out
yeah,
Beetlejuice, but
yeah.
it's going to be up there.
Yes, we're gonna talk about good old Johnny Depp, good old Christina Ricci, good old Christopher Walken, maybe a little bit of glimpse of Casper Van Dien from Stormship
Starship.
Troopers or Starship Troopers or whatever. One of those troopers out there, which is weird because he doesn't really look kind of like him. He gained some weight. He was
Yeah.
definitely a little big. I completely forgot that he played his character. I'm like, who's playing? I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. He does play that guy. Like, but yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about Sleepy Hollow and the legend of the Headless Horseman.
Oh, dude, absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean, I love all things Sleepy Hollow. I mean, next to obviously buying like, you know, everything under the sun when it comes to like vampires and stuff like that, and collecting all of that kind of stuff, and my love of like Lizzie Borden and stuff like that. I fucking love Sleepy Hollow shit. Like, I've got so many statues and figurines of like the Headless Horseman and all that kind of stuff. And when Mrs. Vamp and I went out and met Christina Ricci, one of the things that Megan got signed is that she got a really cool, like, Sleepy Hollow poster signed by Christina Ricci. So Mrs. Vamp was all about that. And we love that movie in this household. And one of the reasons too why I truly love it as much as I do, because look, don't get me wrong, it's a badass film. I think it's a really, really excellent film. I love the way it's shot. I love the way it's acted. I love the special effects. I love the cast. Like, don't get me wrong, if this was a showdown or if this was an alphabets of horror, it's again, it's going to be hard pressed for me to give it a 10 because like you, I've got certain little bit of spaces that I need to leave. But like you had talked about with one of the movies that you care about, like, oh, it's easily at least a 9 because of just it checks all of my boxes. But one of the main reasons why I'm so fiery and passionate about this movie is I grew up on the simplistic cartoon. Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman. I
Yep.
love that movie so much. That little short film, that little short cartoon, like it's a big part of my life growing up back when a lot of the times they would show those things. And there's a couple of channels now that I think it used to be called like ABC Family. I think it's called something like Free Flow now or Freeform or something like that that does those kind of 31 days of Halloween. But there are channels that still show it. But I absolutely have my physical copy, and I really love that cartoon movie. Like I said, it was a really big part of my life growing up, and I've seen it so many times. I know all the quotes. I know all the little, you know, the scared faces, all the ticks, all the movements, the music. I know all of that. But yeah, so anyway, I love Sleepy Hollow, and I've always been a Johnny Depp fan. Of course, growing up with Christina Ricci like we did in my love affair of the Addams Family and stuff, it's always like, dude, Christina Ricci and Christopher Walken is Christopher Walken. He's just great in everything. It doesn't even need to be horror. I mean, dude, Clem Doyle in Joe Dirt, you remember that character too. There's just something as a character actor that Christopher Walken does so well and so perfectly all the time. So, yeah, man. I mean, Sleepy Hollow, I love this movie. I love the design of it. The Headless Horseman comes in, decapitations galore, hiding out in the old, you know, haunted, spooky tree, and the learning of like why is he killing these people off? How was the Headless Horseman wronged that he needs to exact his revenge? I just think it's a really brilliantly written story, directed, executed, and acted, dude. It's everything I like.
Oh yeah, exactly. I just love it. The whole gothic side of it. Him being like a man of science and not believing, the supernatural and stuff like that, to becoming it and stuff like that. I love the fact that Christina Ricci's character is like drawing like pagan symbols. He thinks that they're putting witchcraft, but it's actually her trying to protect him. And I love it how it's like the lineage of like you said, this family and stuff like that, and how everybody's being killed. And like I said, I mean, Christopher Walken, even though 90% of this movie he doesn't have a head, when he does
Yeah.
have a head, he's pretty badass looking. I love the way that they just like, he grinded his teeth out to look like, sharp, kind of fangy kind of thing. I think it's so cool. I mean, I think it's just a cool movie and such a like a cool atmospheric film, where it does that, where it's like, everybody knows about Sleepy Hollow, everybody knows about the Headless Horseman. And then obviously, I mean, you gotta, with a cartoon, they're making, like I said, I grew up on that cartoon. I love it. But you gotta realize this guy is, hopping off heads. You gotta have a little bit of graphicness into it. So I love the fact that it, they just, no heads rolling. It's going. It's people are getting chopped off throughout the left and right and stuff like that. So it's always
Dude,
a
yeah,
good
the
time.
fucking children weren't spared,
Yeah.
bro.
Yeah, he's like, oh yeah, I still gotta kill that kid. Yeah, pop, pop, chop, comes out with it. You're like, hell yeah, man, you don't care. I mean, granted, yeah, you don't see it, but like I said, I thought it was a cool movie and stuff like that. And like I said, obviously it's one that a lot of people, like you said, if you're gonna pick movies that almost every person probably as horror fans likes, Sleepy Hollow is probably gonna be on that list of films that are probably one of the ones that are the Tim Burton films that they are gonna like. That going into that, let's
Oh
go into the
boy.
ones that people don't like. Now
This
this
is
one is
all
where
you to
I
start
die.
off there,
This is
Devil. This is
this is
all
where
you.
yeah, this is where I die on the hill. Now, granted, I'm not gonna say this movie's perfect. I'm not gonna say that it isn't. But I love this version of it. I think it's great. Tim hates it.
Yeah.
Everybody in the world fucking hates it. But I'm a huge fan of the originals. I'm a huge fan of these remake ones now that have been coming out. And we're gonna talk about Planet of the Apes. I mean, first of all, who doesn't
Get
love a
your
little bit of
paws off me, you damn dirty
yeah.
ape.
Who doesn't love a little Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch? Oh yeah, let's go. First of all, that's going that. Now you got, you got Helen Bottom Carter in her start of Tim Burton films, which is the next girl in his list of women that he's going to be with and is going to be in like 9 billion movies that we're going to do. But it's also
She's basically Tim's Sherry Moon
yeah,
zombie.
you got that. You got Tim Roth in this movie. I'm a huge Tim Roth fan. Michael Clark Duncan, I'm a huge fan of his. Paul Giamatti, and all those goes. But like I said, man, it's so weird. So obviously everybody knows about this movie. Everybody has either seen the 70s and the 60s Planet of the Apes. Most people probably have skipped this Planet of the Apes, but you probably have maybe watched it or at least know the Planet of the Apes remakes now. And like I said, I mean, to me, I think that other than okay, I love the original. The I guess the makeup for the actors and all like that was good for what its time was.
Yeah.
And obviously the newer ones now are insane because of all the stop time, stop motion capture and stuff like that that they can do with CGI and all that to make Andy Serkis and all those guys look like actual apes and stuff like that. So I'll be with Monotonic. This movie here, I'll put down as one of like the greatest as far as like how good it looks. I mean, like I said, prosthetically, man, it's amazing. These guys actually look like monkeys. Tim Roth's character constantly, all the guy. I mean, Helen Bonham Carter as a female ape that makes you still want to make out with her and love her. It's like, oh my god, she was still smoking hot as an ape. You're like, oh my god, not only in certain movies, you have like Johnny Depp, questioning maybe some of our sexualities and stuff like that. Now you got Helen Bonham Carter, making us think about interspecies erotica all of a sudden. You're like, what the
No, for
hell?
sure. Oh, dude, absolutely. And it's cool to see Linda and Charleston, in this movie, which I thought was pretty cool. For me, I mean, it's simple enough, dude. I like this movie, Devil. I mean, it doesn't do it for me, just in the big picture, but I don't hate it, you
Yeah.
know? Again, Tim has been like, dude, nope, never again. No more movies, not touching this franchise ever again. Um, I think he's being kind of hard on himself, but again, he's the man on the project. So I get
Yeah.
I get where he's coming
Well,
from.
yeah, I mean, a lot of it had to do with the ending, and that's the thing about it too that people don't quite understand. And it's a weird thing about it, which I read a subreddit about like their theories, and it's probably the best theory that I've ever seen, and this is probably why it explains the ending. So like obviously anybody in this movie, okay, so the first person to go was obviously the monkey goes into space first and gets trapped in, then Marky Mark goes after him, and then the space shuttle that they were going are looking after Marky Mark. Now, even though the first thing goes in this wormhole, the way this wormhole works, this thingy, is the first one to go in is the last one to come out. So obviously, so the space station comes. That's why it's been there for thousands of years and stuff like that. Mark comes in, blah blah blah. Everybody's like, it's already evolved and all this crap like that. Then at the end, he comes down. All of a sudden, saves it like, oh crap, like that. And then whenever he leaves, he goes into what would be the back to the states. He thinks it's right. That's the ending where all of a sudden you see the monk, that you see the bad guy that Tim Roth was playing. All of a sudden he's in the Abraham Lincoln Monument, and people are like, this doesn't make any sense. Is this like time different thing and stuff like that? And it kind of does make sense if that wormhole was still open. It could have been 1,000 years later somewhere.
Yeah.
Tim Roth's character found a way to get out, maybe finding pieces of that spaceship and using it to find a way to get out. And that's why when he goes out, he's like I said, being that last person, he's technically the first person. But I mean, I thought they did it just because it's like, it was like that, people who watched the original Planet of the Apes, especially if you've never, like I said, the original one, you watch that now people know, but if you watch that when it came out in like either the 60s or 70s, I can't remember when it came out, but when it came out, that ending was like M. Night Shyamalama,
Oh
freaking
yeah.
crazy twist. Like, holy shit, it's the Statue of Liberty. Like, the planet he's on is actually Earth, and that's the planet of the apes. It's Earth. It's the same thing. And I think that's kind of what they wanted to do. They wanted that kind of shocking kind of end. Yes, it didn't quite work nearly as well. People were like, "What, really?" And like I said, so many people shit on this movie. I mean, like I said, I've never been a huge Marky Mark fan as far as musically wise, but I've always been a fan of him, acting wise. I've always thought he
Yeah.
was a really good actor. I like a lot of his stuff. And sometimes he's in movies that are good and not good. Some, you can put this one. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't like The Happening from M. Night movie. I think it's a fun movie. It's a movie about freaking plants subliminally making you go and kill yourself. What's not cool about that? That's kind of cool. But anyway, like I said, with the Planet of the Apes, like I said, I'm a huge Planet of the Apes fan. Yes, I'm not gonna say that it's better than the original one. Now, granted, I still think it's better than some of the original films.
Right.
Like I said, some of those ones like Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and some of those ones start the
Some
battle
of those movies are a hard step
conquest,
down.
conquest for the Planet of the Apes. Some of those got kind of harsh. Now these new ones, I love every single one so far. They've hit every one out of the park. I'm a huge fan of this new reboot of these Planet of the Apes. Like, they're completely stellar. I will die as, but when we're talking about better sequels or better remakes and stuff like that, I think that these series, even though I know the original trilogy, the original Planet of the Apes is, you know, you don't want to touch it because that's the holy grail of stuff with Planet of the Apes movies. But I don't know, man. These new ones I think are sick. But yeah, I mean, I love this one. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't put this on my bottom five. I would not. I wouldn't. I personally think there's other ones. I may put it on my top five just to give everybody a big fuck you. But in general, I'm like, I don't know because there's so many other movies. But it definitely wouldn't be on my bottom five at all. It might be adjacent to it. It'd be close. It's definitely not going to be, it's definitely not. I'm never going to put this as Tim Burton's best movie. And like I said, it's one of those ones too where it's like it's not that bad, especially when it comes to directors and stuff like that. Him shitting it. It reminds me of like Stephen King with Maximum Overdrive, how much he hates that movie. He was like on, high on coke and shit about this movie.
That
But I'm
movie
like,
is
dude,
amazing.
I'm like, what movie are you watching? Yes, it's cheesy, but it's still the Maximum Overdrive is an amazing movie, and I mean, granted, I don't think Planet of the Apes is that stellar as Maximum Overdrive is, but I think the directors are kind of giving themselves a little bit too low of a score for the movie.
Yeah, Devil. I also think like the ending of the original Planet of the Apes has also just become such a pop culture like thing, from like being quoted, from being used in things like The Simpsons and other stuff like that. Like
Baseballs.
oh yes, Spaceballs, like that end of the movie Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Like
Yep.
that that ending, that final scene, it's so now intertwined in pop culture that I think with the fact that they kind of strayed from it is one of the reasons why everybody was like, "Oh my God, over my dead body" and stuff like that. But yeah, again, it's cool. It's fun. I like it just fine. Like I said, doesn't really do it for me, but it doesn't ruin my day by any means. But now this is going to be an interesting one there, Devil, my friend. Let's talk about possibly the greatest Tim Burton movie that nobody even knows about. And the reason I'm phrasing it that way is, again, it may or may not end up on one of the fives. Again, I don't have it in my top five. I don't think I can put it in my bottom either. Similar to what you were saying with Planet of the Apes, I find this movie very cool. For somebody like Tim, who's established the way he is with a certain visual style, obviously that just gothic style, just period. Even Planet of the Apes had that gothic appeal in certain ways. But Big Fish is this really interesting just drama that, yeah, it's absolutely got that Tim Burton stamp on it. kooky characters, unique storytelling, going back in like visions, coming up to the present, ultimate like, unique endings and like that combination of like, inner sadness mixed with like a warm and fuzzy kind of glow. That's kind of the way that I phrase it this way because I think this is easily, I mean, if I was making a list, if we were doing top fives on our director episodes that included movies that people would be like, wait, huh, really? My number one for Tim Burton would be Big Fish because unless you're a Tim Burton person, the logo, the DVD cover, the posters kind of a thing, it's pretty recognizable. Like you've probably seen it, you've probably noticed it, you've probably seen the font of Big Fish. But the average moviegoer, even in horror, even in gothic stuff, probably isn't going to get triggered when it comes to Big Fish being a Tim Burton movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's definitely for me. Me personally, I think this is. I mean, I know it's obviously he didn't. Tim Burton didn't write this. I mean, it was obviously wrote from from a book and stuff like that. But I mean, ultimately, I definitely put this as my really my top. I definitely is in my top five Tim Burton films. I mean, I know I gotta
Okay.
cut. I know I gotta kick out some stuff that I probably shouldn't kick out. But the thing about, like you said, I mean, it's definitely. I mean.
They're our lists, bro.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about this. This movie has just got everything. I just love it. It's such. I mean, I mean, you talk about watchability. I've watched this movie so many times, more times. I mean, I wouldn't go say it's more times than some of the other ones. Obviously, I've seen Beetlejuice like 9 billion times and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's just one of those movies that, like, I don't know. It's just always been such a good movie. I just love the fact of the storytelling of it. I love the fact that, it's this father trying to, obviously, the day, son was born, he missed it. And when she came to, when he came to the hospital, he was already born. And even the doctor said, back in that time, the dads weren't even allowed in the operating room. And that's a boring story. Nobody wants to hear that shit. So I'm going to talk about going and getting this big carp, this big fish that nobody could catch and losing my ring, going off to war, meeting these Asian girls that are Siamese twins and going off and meeting this big giant and making them go in the circus and this town and it make everything exaggerated and stuff like that. Even though, like I said, eventually when you find out, the son finds out that all these stories are based in truth. These people are real people. He just kind of exaggerated the truth a little bit about everything because it makes it more of an interesting story, and that's what I love about it. Especially because it's like it's especially towards the end. You want to talk about like when we talked about earlier about you can be a big strong man if you could talk about when we talked about Edward Scissorhands and her twirling around in the snow of him cutting the ice and stuff like that. You're gonna Niagara
Oh,
Falls. But the same thing with Big Fish. It's one of those ones where that the ending and stuff like that about him, his father passing and all that
yeah,
stuff
the
like that.
father-son
The
relationship.
father and son relationship at that end, and you find out the story, and then the son brings back the stories and starts doing it again. It's just one of those ones that, like, like I said, I implore if you have any feelings whatsoever, you're gonna get the tears in this. And like I said, it's such a beautiful story mixed in with that. That craziness, and it's got some cool characters. It's got some cool actors. You got Steve Buscemi in this movie, which I love. Obviously Danny DeVito is like a circus carnival guy who's also maybe a werewolf. We don't really quite know. You have that Chinese, and then you have the giant, as most people who, yeah. If you're a horror fan, and obviously a lot of the horror fans are on the hat, like I said, maybe you haven't seen this movie. There is an actor in this movie that is known to horror fans, and that's Tiny from
Yeah,
House of a Thousand Corpses. Is playing, Matthew's playing the big giant. You know what I mean? He's such a cool character in this and stuff like that. And I love it. Like, I love that very end, of obviously of the movie when the father passes and it's at the funeral and you start seeing like the real people and they're having their stories. Like I said, I mean, like I said, it's one of those ones that's, like I said, with Tim Burton, it's like it's not a, it's like I said, even though it's a Tim Burton film, it's
Yeah.
such an off kind of, it's got a lot of that Tim Burton-esque stuff in it, but it's
Right.
such an off the wall Tim Burton movie. It's a more of like, like I said, it's more of like a, like a father son kind of drama kind of story mixed in with all that. It's just, it's a good feel. It's a good, good feeling movie. It's one of those ones that's like I said, every time I watch it, man, I just like, I love it more and more every time I see it. And it's like I said, it's definitely on there. It's like I said, it's probably, like I said, it's not that normal, typical Tim Burton style that you're kind of used to with the gothic and the craziness and that weird stuff. Even though it's got a little bit of that, he's got that fantasy section of it.
Yep.
It's just I like it because it's different. You know what I mean? It's a different take of Tim's side.
100%, and Johnny Depp comes in with a little bit of vocal work, as a voiceover for the catfish and stuff like that. And it is, man. It's just such a cool movie. And I implore you, Fangs and Infernos, to check this one out if you're unfamiliar with it. I'd seen it a few times. I think it's great. It's definitely brighter than what you're going to expect out of a Tim Burton movie. But again, it's that same type of fantasies, those kooky characters, and just like Devil said, an exaggerated feel to it. But it's a really, really cool movie, Fangs and Infernos, and definitely go out and check it out. Now, as we move into our next movie, here's the thing with this. Similar to what Devil was saying when it comes to Planet of the Apes, about whether he may or may not put it in his top five, possibly put it in to piss some people off. I'm kind of riding the same fence and wave when it comes to this movie. Um, I love the cast of characters, but my favorite author growing up as a kid is the guy that wrote the book that this movie is based off of. And Tim Burton has, we talked about it early in the episode. He's got his thumbprint on multiple movie adaptations of this guy's books, and that's Roald Dahl. I fucking love Roald Dahl. I remember being very young, like I was probably like 7 or 8 years old or whatever it was, and my mom telling me that he had passed away and feeling devastated because so many of his books do I not only like but love. You've got The Witches, Fantastic Mr. Fox, you know, fucking James and the Giant Peach, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Now, here's the thing, people have their reservations and their opinions of this movie. I enjoyed it. Look, I went and saw it in the theaters because, of course, Roald Dahl, I'm going to come a running. I'm going to come a screaming. But I liked it just fine. There's a lot about this movie that I can take apart. But the biggest thing about this movie, being the kind of enthusiast that I am about the source material, is it's actually closer to the book source material than Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory ever was. And of course, that's the one that's actually considered the gold standard of the movie with the late great Gene Wilder, who we absolutely love. But look, I like this movie. I like Johnny's adaptation. I love the intertwining of using Christopher Lee, of my brethren, playing his father. I think that, um, Richie Highmore was great as Charlie, and I loved the uniqueness of the same character actor playing every Oompa Loompa.
Yeah, yeah, I love Deep Roy. Yeah, huge fan. Always been a huge fan of his. Obviously he's done some of the Star Wars movies and things like that. But I'm a huge fan of, like I said, with him being in those movies, he was always kind of like Warwick Davis. He was always in costumes and things like that. I'm a huge fan of Never Ending Story, and
Oh
he
my
was the
God.
guy. He was the guy who was writing the snail, and it was actually himself throughout the movie. So I always was a huge fan of his. I think it was pretty cool. I don't think he knew to begin with. He was like, yeah, Tim's like, yeah, you're gonna be the Oompa Loompa. Oh, cool. No, you're gonna be all the Oompa Loompas. We're gonna film you doing all that stuff. And he's like, oh my god, that's crazy. So that's kind of cool. That yeah, I mean, when it comes to this movie, yeah, it's kind of like how, okay, you're gonna precursor into this and stuff like that. With like, you go and look into like Stephen King's and the Shining. Granted, yes, The Shining, Kubrick, awesome movie. The TV made for movie, not nearly as good, but it's a little bit closer to the source material. I feel the same way with this one. Like, I love this movie. I think it's cool because it is definitely a lot more like the book.
Yes.
But I mean, I'm sorry. Anybody, I mean, I'm, I'm all cool with opinions, and people are going to have opinions. Although your opinion is wrong, if you ever feel like this movie is better than the Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
And
Factory.
for the record, Devil, and for the record, Devil, I am not one of
Yeah.
those. I absolutely do prefer Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka. I'm just putting that out for, you know, for clarity. Once I got off my initial soapbox.
Yeah.
Again, I do have a soft spot and a protection of this movie in
Oh,
certain
yeah.
ways because it's so close to the source material that I hold so dear.
No, yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, the one thing, and yeah, I put it in my notes, it's definitely a joke. The one thing I would definitely say about this movie that's better than the original movie is we don't have to listen to Cheer Up Charlie.
You
Even
love that song.
that's the greatest song never wrote. I wish it was never wrote. The funny thing about that song was that they weren't even it wasn't originally going to be in the movie, and they needed to add extra time. And they're like, okay, we're gonna put this scene that we didn't really like to begin with in the movie. I'm like, no, you should have just left it out and left the movie 20 minutes shorter or whatever. I wouldn't have cared. But it's funny about that too, because of us being, in, when we're not in our, in our caskets in Transylvania or in the Devil area, we frequent the Baltimore area, and I'm not 100% sure now, but Miss Devil, when she used to work in Laurel, the lady who actually played the original Charlie's mom was actually from that area and used to come into the pet store all the time, and stuff like that. So it was kind of funny. We were always like, oh yeah, man, she just sing "Cheer Up, Charlie" to her. But yeah, anyway, like I said, it's come as far as the Tim Burton Charlie Factor. I mean, like I said, I love this movie. I think it's fun. Yes, like I said, it's definitely, as far as some things, it's definitely not gonna be better. I mean, I love Johnny Depp as Willy Wonka. Obviously, Gene Wilder is definitely gonna be over Johnny Depp in that.
Yes.
I do like the songs in this movie. They're fun and quirky. I think the songs in the original are way better, other than Cheer Up Charlie. But I mean, I just like that. But I mean, like I said, with it being more closer to the source material and being a little bit more, and you have a little bit more of that backstory of, of Willie and growing up and his dad being a dentist and all that kind of stuff, and him going out and finding these Oompa Loompas and saving them, and them, loving chocolate and stuff like that because of the cocoa beans and all that kind of stuff. I mean, like I said, I love this movie. I mean, what's not to love? I mean, it's funny, it's kooky, it's still got those actors. Like I said, I mean, I don't really think too much about anybody's better than them. I mean, I did like the people who played the kids. Like I said, I definitely do have more of a softer spot for the Gene Wilder version, even with the kids and stuff like that. But I do love the fact that, like I said, I do love Oompas. I do love Deep Roy in this movie. And like I said, I think it's a fun movie. I think a lot of people shit on it more than they need to shit on it. And it's like, it's just because it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I understand, it's one of those things that, yeah, probably maybe shouldn't have been remade it or whatever like that. But you know what I mean? Because it's like, why mess with, with something that's perfect and classic and already. But then again, it's one of those ones where I'm like, yeah, when it first came out, I was like, okay, this is gonna suck. When I heard that they were making a remake of this, and then I heard that Tim Burton was doing it, and I was like, okay, that'd be cool. At least if anybody's gonna do it, Tim's style and weirdness and kookiness is gonna be cool. And then when you see Willie and people, that's one thing that people don't like about Johnny's character. His adaptation of Willie is creepy and funny, but that's how he was in the book. He was a
Yeah.
very out, creepy child molester, but not really a child molester.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, and you do see them at the end of the movie, so it just kind of is what it is. But he's kind of a child murderer, if
Yeah,
you like. It's kind of very Black Phone to a certain degree because every time, one of the children was in trouble, he was like something was in his way, kind of like stopping him from helping or rescuing. And then every time something bad happened to the child, he miraculously found like what he needed. Like when Veruca Salt was being attacked by the squirrels and thrown into the dumpster and into the potentially into the incinerator. Like, he's going through this big ring of keys trying to find the key to unlock the gate. That's like barely above his knees. Like that's basically at his waist that he could like step over to go help. And then after it's said and done, it's like, oh, but yeah, this is the right key, and the door opens right up. So it's definitely crazy like that. And I love the cheeky little fun humor. I love the fact that after in the great class elevator, they come crashing down through the roof and of Charlie's home and makes this big old ruckus. And Grandma Georgina is just kind of like, I think there's someone at the door. And the same thing too when they're like, thanks for the hole in our roof, Willie. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
fun.
exactly.
It's
It's
just
like, yeah, it's funny even with this one and the other, the original one. It's just always like we talk about, the grandparents are both they're all bedridden, haven't gotten up anywhere. Oh, but no, he can get a chance to go to the chocolate factory. Yep, the grandpa's being a son
I'm
of a
good.
bitch. Now all of a sudden, hey, I'm good. I'm going with you. I'm like,
Yeah.
where was that energy like a minute ago? You couldn't have swept grandpa. Yeah, like you said, I love the fact. Yeah, it's like thanks for the whole freaking Wonka.
Yeah.
Now we gotta fix all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean,
Jerk.
it, yeah, it definitely. I mean, it's just funny. I love the very beginning where it was like, the Willy Wonka, there's a great destructive, and it starts burning and getting on fire. He's like, ooh, that was kind of exciting. And then like, everything in here is edible. Even I'm edible, but that's cannibalism.
Exactly. And the songs are fun. The Willy Wonka songs are better. I do have a soft spot since we were talking about Ozzy. It just kind of triggered me a little bit. I do have a soft spot for the Mike TV though Oompa Loompa song because it's so metal and
Yeah, yeah.
it's really fun. So and like what watching Deep Roy do the glam metal Ozzy Osbourne type metal bands and stuff like that, and also with the tassels and stuff coming off
Yeah.
the jacket. So it's like I do fancy the Mike TV song in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
So but it was super duper cool, man. But coming off of this one is since we talked about movies that Tim would damn sure not do a sequel for, let's talk about kind of the closest thing we've ever had to a sequel of a hardcore loved Tim Burton movie. And the thing that's also interesting about this, because there's another version, like inclusion, I should say, that we'll discuss a little bit later, is that there's a lot of universes out there in movies. You hear it all the time. The Conjuring universe, that weird Pooniverse that they're doing right now. There's all these different kind of like universes that tie in with different fan theories and different like ideas of how movies should be, characters, where they've been, where they're going, where are they at right now. And this movie ties in and has a lot of similarities as far as building characters to our beloved Nightmare Before Christmas. And let's talk a little bit about The Corpse Bride.
Oh yeah, like I said, it was basically kind of deemed as being, one of those like, like you said, unofficial kind of sequel, kind of like not really, like I said, not really a sequel because obviously the characters are all different people and stuff like that. But like you said, it's in that same realm, same world. But I mean, like I said, I've always loved The Corpse Bride. It had been a while since I've seen it because like I said, as far as like between Corpse and between Nightmare. I've definitely watched Nightmare more often. I definitely see
Totally.
it more often. But I've always been a huge fan of this. And like I said, one of the facts that I read, and which is just like that's I said we've talked about before with the Nightmare Before Christmas, where they have to, it's all clay animated and they have to keep frames. There was actually 109,440 individual frames in this movie. I mean, that's insane that you have to like, get everything perfectly right and stuff like that. But like I said, when it comes to the Corpse Bride, I love it. I mean, I love the
Yeah.
actors. They obviously Johnny Depp's in it again. You got Helena. You got Tracy Ullman's in this, and you got a couple of other newer cats. But I always thought this was like an interesting movie because it was just like that getting pushed into, into getting married and not really liking who you want to marry. You kind of run away and you're not quite sure. And then, he's trying to practice his lines, and he, does the ring thing, but puts it on a stick that he doesn't notice that the stick looks exactly like a hand. I don't know how you not notice. I mean, I know as kids, you would go, ooh, that tree looks like it's smiling at you. This tree looks like it's got that. I mean, that tree stump hanging out of the ground definitely was a very corpse hand. And
Yeah, but as an adult, you
unfortunately,
need to notice that shit.
yeah, unfortunately, he did not notice, and he gets put into the netherworld of the corpse bride. And I love all the crazy kookiness of it. I love the
Me
Mr.
too.
Bojangles character, which our good band Danny Elfman plays and stuff like that. Apparently, doing the voice for that apparently made him like basically like pull muscles, and like he basically like almost killed himself like vocally, because the voice is very weird and had to talk like, so he had to talk a lot weirder in it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a fun movie, and like it's one of those ones that's like, yeah, I mean, it's Tim Burton going back to that stylistic of what, like I said, that Nightmare Before Christmas kind of, that love of stop animation and storytelling and character building, and
Yeah.
just like, that great voice work and stuff like that throughout it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the family expectations of this family, the family expectations of this family. It's kind of got that Capulet and Montague kind of like feel to it. Because you've got that hierarchy, when it comes to you need to marry this person because that's what's expected of you versus no, but I love this person. And again, still has that same, story behind it's just not gonna work. It's a kind of a reoccurring theme. But I love the companionship design of this movie. This knowing that these two people are from like serious, like super different worlds, that there's 100% no way that this can work, but it's still getting the characters to a better place than where they were before. And yeah, I love the style, I love the animation. Again, that same dark aesthetic that the Nightmare Before Christmas had. A little bit more of a simplistic palette though, because the movie overall is a very, very dominant, like black, silver, and blue color palette for pretty much the whole movie, which I think is actually kind of cool because it reminds me of Ed Wood, where the Ed Wood movie is black and white for the whole movie, versus again, all with the exception of Big Fish, all of Tim's movies tend to be an overall
Yep.
slightly darker aesthetic visually, but there is the proper colors and the proper color palette still being
Oh,
used.
yep. We lost you for a second.
Oh,
Mhm.
am I back?
Yeah, yeah, you're good now.
Gotcha. And the thing I love about this movie is I love the color palette. Like Corpse Bride has got this very cool, like black, silver, blue thing going for pretty much the whole movie. And I love it. I'm here for it. It reminds me so much of Ed Wood, which is black and white. Of course, Tim's movies, with the exception of like Big Fish and some other movies and stuff, you know, that are a little bit brighter, all has that same kind of darker palette to it with color splotches. They're not all super duper dark, but they're dark-ish movies with the colors, but the appropriate color palettes, color splotches are put in when they're necessary. But I do love this movie as this very cool, simplistic, dominantly three-color movie. Very, very cool, and I love it to death. And speaking of things I love to death, 100% do I love this movie. I am still fucking 18 years later, 17 years later, whatever the hell it is, pissed as fuck that Johnny Depp didn't win the Oscar for this. Appreciate that he won the Golden Globe for Best Oscar, so I kind of got half a victory. But I really think he got fucked. But that's a conversation for another day. Dude, Sweeney Todd, I love this movie top to bottom. I'm going to be on my soapbox for a second because I can really do a deep dive, but then we'll never get shit done. I love Sweeney Todd. I love the characters. I love the acting. I'm an old school Sweeney Todd person. I know the story. I know the tale. I have multiple different versions of various Sweeney Todd movies, and I love them all. From Broadway stuff to old movies like with Todd Slaughter, obviously all the way up to the present. I truly love this movie. The soundtrack is bitchin'. I know every song, I know every word, and I love the characters. I love how they're acted out. I think everybody was amazing in the characters that they played. And I, going into this movie, was not a Sacha Baron Cohen fan. And overall, still not really my cup of tea. I don't really get his humor. It's not for me. I just don't get it. There's other stuff that he's done that I do like. Like I liked his character in Talladega Nights. So he has done things that I enjoy more than others. But I loved his portrayal of his barber character here. But absolutely, man, Sweeney Todd, from Johnny being Sweeney, Helena being, Mrs. Lovett, Sasha being the rebel barber, Senor Pirelli, just all the way down to everything in between. I mean, dude, Alan Rickman. Um, I'm drawing a blank on his name, so I'm going to call him Peter Pettigrew. I love everything about this movie, dude.
Yeah, yeah. For me, as far as when it comes to the Sacha Baron Cohen, I've always been a huge fan of his. I'm a huge fan of Borat. I'm a huge fan of Bruno. I love his style of like weird. I'm gonna make people a lot more more like weirder and kind of annoy you and kind of push buttons and do weird stuff. I loved him as Ollie G, Ollie G in the house, number
So
one.
stupid.
I love I love all his characters. So when I saw Sasha was going to be in this movie, I'm like, oh my god, that's perfect to begin with. And then obviously a lot of people, as far as that, I don't remember the character, his name, but the kid who played, the love interest for Johnny Depp's daughter, for Sweeney Todd's daughter, the
Yeah.
the kid that comes on the ship guy. Obviously, people who are huge into Stranger Things, this is pre before he became Vecna, and
Yep.
and played that with him. Obviously, he's been in a couple other TV series. He was in Twilight for a little bit. He was in I think he was in Camelot, the series. For that, he was like the main. I think he might have been Camelot, but I know he was big into that. But yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, I've always loved this movie. I've always loved the play. I always loved it. I know, like to begin with, that they didn't really kind of want Johnny Depp to begin with because they thought he was going to be more rock and roll, I guess, vocally than what they were expecting. But then he obviously, when they did it, they were like, he came out and, showed, and he's like, okay, we're going to do this. I love the fact that, that they do that. I mean, it's got a couple of my favorite things that I always laugh about all the time. And I understand, like I said, when it comes to the play and stuff like that, you got to do it. We talked about it before. This movie's way more bloodier and brutal than
So
what you're
much
expecting.
blood.
I love the fact that it's like it's like over the top, like freaking, chroma freaking blood squirts and shit. It's just like I'm gonna cut you're gonna cut your throat, and it's gonna go and
Yeah.
shoot out like a freaking fire hydrant. I love that. I mean, I still, even watching it to now, every time it happens, even though it happens 10 times in the movie, and I've seen it 9 billion times, every time he drops anybody from the chair and they land on their head, I laugh every time. It's the funniest shit ever.
The
And it
sound
doesn't
is
matter how many
hilarious.
times I watch it, I still laugh every time one of the other people hit their head on the freaking plop, plop, well, I still laugh every time. It's the funniest shit in the entire world. I'm like, oh my god, it's so great. But I love, like I said, I thought this was a good movie. I always like when it comes to, when it comes to a film adaptation of a Broadway film or a Broadway play. I mean, probably other than maybe some fan of the operas, I put this as the top,
Yeah.
just definitely top five of any play that's ever been from a Broadway play that started as a Broadway play first and then became a movie. I mean, there's other ones that have kind of gone the other way that
Yeah.
were in movies that put into plays. But yeah, as far as like, stories that were based off of a Broadway, it definitely, like I said, I always love it. I think it's funny. I love Helena's singing in this. I love the songs. It's like, the worst pies in London,
Yep.
all the way to, just into the ending. I mean, I love the ending of it just because it's so crazy. Even though the ending of the movie does differ a little bit different from the
Yeah.
play to an extent. I still love that fact where it's like, yeah, he's hell bent on killing Alan Rickman's character. I'm horrible at characters' names, but the bad guy in that, he's Johnny. Sweeney Todd's obviously revenge because he thinks that his wife and his kids died, and he realizes
Big,
the kid's still
big
alive.
Judge Turpin.
Yeah, Judge Turpin, and then I love the fact that it, and but it gets to that end where it's like it's such a triangle of like love, it's like that, love hurts kind of song, he loves her, but she loves somebody else, and he loves somebody else, and they can't win, and I love that where that's this obsession, Sweeney Todd's obsession for revenge for basically putting him in prison and taking his wife and stuff like that, prisoner and stuff like that, to the revenge where apparently, if he thinks of that, to Helena's character, Miss Lovett, or was that what her name? Miss
Yeah,
Lovett?
yeah,
Yeah,
Mrs. Lovett.
but her character to being in love with Johnny Depp's character, Sweeney Todd, because
Yeah,
even in the thing, because Johnny Depp, when he sings his song, he talks about his wife being the most beautiful woman in the world, and then when they get to her version, she's talking about the most beautiful man she's ever seen. So her obsession with that, which you find out, obviously, and people know that her the wife didn't die,
yep,
all of a sudden, he kills somebody because he figures it's somebody that, find out about it, kills it, drops down, finds out that it's his wife and that she knew the whole entire time. And, he kills her. Then the obsession with the little boy and him loving, her character, then eventually killing Johnny Depp. It's one of those ones, it's like, like it's got that what quote unquote Romeo and Juliet kind of ending. I love the ending because it's just very, everybody dies except for the kid, but pretty much it's just like, it's that love triangle between the three of them that I just go, and then you just kind of wonder, I've always kind of wondered. I don't think that maybe you might know that I don't think they've ever made a sequel to any of this or anything like that because you never like you find out about that and you have the ending where obviously Sweeney Todd dies, Miss Lewis dies, the daughter, the wife dies, but you never really know what really happened with his daughter and the shipmate. Did they actually, they talked about sailing away and getting away. I'm assuming they did because he was a seaman.
yep. No, for sure. And it's crazy. I mean, it's this crazy tortured love story. I mean, Sweeney Todd's undying, unwavering love and support for his wife, who he did think was dead, to Mrs. Lovett always wanting Sweeney, but also knowing that his wife was alive the whole time. Because she even says in their final confrontation, "Hey, look, all I said was that she tried to kill herself, but I never said she died." Um, and, ultimately, Sweeney killing his wife, think for real, thinking that it was just this homeless woman that was just kind of in his personal space when he was all tortured and fucked up, until the light hit her face in the right way. And that's when he realized that this was his wife that he had just killed. Ultimately, is what turns his revenge on Mrs. Lovett, because he's like, "You told me this." And she's like, "I kind of didn't. You
Yeah,
assumed." And he's like, "I did. You're right. Into the fire with you."
yeah,
But of course, with the little boy, who he took over from, who he basically adopted from Senor Pirelli, witnessing that and his love as a mother figure for, Mrs. Lovett, turns his revenge on Sweeney Todd. So it could be an interesting. I would prefer. I don't want a full movie. I wouldn't hate a relatively well financed like follow up short film. Maybe 45 minutes. I where you can find out what happened to the young boy, and then of course basically what happened to the lovers. Sweeney's daughter and Benjamin Barker's daughter technically, and yeah, the young man who was the deckhand or the sailor type person. I think that would be cool. I wouldn't hate that. I really would want slash kind of demand that Tim still direct it because I want that feel and that continuity to stay correct and stay proper. I just don't think it would. I think I would probably like it just fine because of how much I like Sweeney Todd, as long as it's, like I said, well financed and acted correctly. But I would definitely prefer that Tim at least have his thumbprint on it, even if he's not directing it or whatever, or as like a producer, so he can at least be like, nah, we should tweak this, or I wouldn't do it that way. That's what I would ultimately prefer. And I think that would be like really, really cool. So I
Yeah.
don't want a full on sequel. I just don't think there's a place for it. And I think the struggle for story continuation outside of those three people would be a bit difficult. I think it'd be hard. I think it would be a bit of a deterrent. So,
Yeah.
but I could get behind a short film. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
and it'd be
probably
kind of interesting too in the short film too. I would love to, because obviously, when this all goes down, Turpin's killed. Obviously, you have the Todd and Levitt and the daughter and and the wife killed and stuff like that. So eventually, the news is gonna come out. Oh, blah blah blah. Oh, blah blah, killed. Oh yeah. By the way, all those pies you've been eating for the last couple of months have been people that you've been eating.
and it's crazy too because
Everybody puking.
yeah, Sweeney was killing all these people that were coming as customers, sending them down the chute to go splat in the comical ways to get made into pies. And the only person that he didn't kill was the guy who brought his family
Yeah,
because you got to leave no witnesses.
yeah,
So that was the
exactly.
thing that was always so crazy about that is like the only guy who got a proper shave, not counting the shave off as I refer to it, but the only customer that Sweeney ever had who actually got a proper shave and lived to tell the tale was the guy who happened to bring his family. So, where it's either he didn't die because his family's there, and you know, and so you can't have any witnesses of this, or the fact that because of Sweeney's particular situation, it was his husband and daughter. I mean,
Yeah.
his wife and daughter.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been a little bit of that. I mean, you got to realize most of the people that he was killing tend to be like bad people
Vagrants.
and
Yeah.
people who are vagabonds or anything like that too for a while. So he wasn't like just killing like innocent people. But then again, he probably was like in such a zone. He was like, oh man, I gotta
Yeah.
let this one go. I gotta actually shave somebody for real this time. But I mean, I love that. I love the like you were saying, like the whole battle, the shave battle between him and Sasha's character the whole entire time. It's just fun. I love that where it's like
Sasha's like
he's
three
singing,
strokes away.
he's singing the whole entire time and taking his time. Is when he's like, "Hey, done."
Yeah, but Sweeney lets him get down to basically where Sasha's like three strokes away from winning this competition, and then in just the winner is
Yep.
Todd. But I love this movie. I love the soundtrack. I love singing the songs. I will give a shout out to the Black Veil Brides. They did a amazing cover, in my opinion. They did a really excellent cover of My Friends. I
Okay.
really thought it was very, very cool. I mean, I've always loved Andy's tone anyway. I am a Black Veil Brides fan. I've always put that on Front Street. So there's a lot of the stuff that they would do that I'm just gonna be on board because I love their look, their style, their sound, and their execution. I'm a BVB fan. I just totally am. But I really, really did enjoy Andy's rendition of My Friends. I thought it was really, really excellent. So hell yeah, dude, fucking horns up for Sweeney Todd. I really, really do love that movie. And we do love our bloodshed, of which there was plenty when it came to that one. But now let's take a little bit of innuendo time to talk about white rabbits and eat me, drink me's and going through holes and fighting evil queens and jabberwockies and all that kind of stuff there, my friends. So I think it's only apropos that we get to discuss only one of them, as Tim didn't have involvement with both of them. But let's talk a little bit about Alice and take a little trip to Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is up on the docket, my friend.
Yeah, yeah. I've always been a huge fan, obviously, of the whole Alice in Wonderland thing. I mean,
Me too.
for me, there's always been two Alice in Wonderlands that I've always put. I put this one in a high regard, as, as maybe like the third one. My favorite ones was a live action one that was really crazy that came out in the early like late 70s, early 80s that I super love. It was like a British one that was really fucking crazy and shit like that. And then I was really huge into, a lot of people don't know, but there was a German stop animation called Alice that was really creepy that I always loved. But I like even this version, I always liked this movie. I always thought it was really cool.
Me too.
It is funny that this is the Tim Burton. I guess theoretically, probably not Tim. Maybe it's Disney coming back to Tim and begging on their knees, like, "Hey, man, we need you." Kind of
Yeah.
spark, 'cause, obviously he's working with Disney on this production now and stuff like that. But yeah, I thought it was a cool cast of characters. Obviously with Johnny Depp playing, the Mad Hatter.
Yeah.
You had Helen Bonham Carter playing, obviously because they were still together playing the Queen, and stuff like that. Anne Hathaway. Yeah, some people, if you know me, I've never been a huge Anne Hathaway fan. I don't really particularly like her character in this movie. I thought she was just kind of boring. I don't like the kind of, but I love Crispin Glover. I mean, obviously Crispin
Oh,
Glover
dude.
from Back to the Future and stuff like that. So it's fun. And then
The return of Alan Rickman.
yeah, yeah, Alan Rickman, doing the caterpillar. I love the whole entire time. It's like I said, it was fun. It's a fun movie. I like the fact that it's kind of really not it's not the the original Alice, because when you're watching it you find out that she's older and she's already been to the Wonderland before all the time. But this is like her not remembering when thinking that her when she was a kid, when she was there and when she was reading the book, and obviously the Alice in Wonderland story that everybody knows, her reading the book and then following the white rabbit and falling in the hole and all that, where the similarities of her doing that in this movie are same. But like I said, it's kind of a continuation, but not a continuation, because obviously it's not when we get into like into the Looking Glass and things like that. It's just basically kind of like a reboot of the
Yeah.
original stories to a point. But then she's already been there, she already knows the characters, so they don't really need introductions, but then they kind of do because she doesn't remember it as much. But I always thought it was fun. I thought this was a cool adaptation of of a thing. And like I said, it's very Tim Burton esque. The whole entire time throughout. It's very it's it's a full length movie that's live action, but it's very comic-y. It's very stop time animation looking, but but with that with live actors and stuff like that.
Totally, Devil. And the thing is, like, this is gonna sound like I'm shitting on it, which I'm really not. Because I really like this movie. I enjoy it quite a bit. It's kind of like a less cool version of Fairuza Balk's Return to Oz,
Yeah.
where it's got that she's already been there. It's Dorothy going back to Oz, it's Alice going back to Wonderland, but it deals, like you said, more of that kind of like it's sort of a sequel, but kind of more like a reboot because it's not a new retelling because there's nothing new to tell because it's already happened. But yeah, that's kind of the way that I look at it. It's like it's got that similarity to like Return to Oz. And the only real reason why I say it's like a less cool version is simply more because the way they did the Return of Oz movie back then with the lack of what they have at their disposal now is what makes that movie in my eyes just so cool. The Wheelers were so freaky and so crazy, and just the idea of the witch with all the various severed heads, and she can just change out her head anytime she wants based on whether she likes this person's features or skin and add to the collection. I've always loved that movie. I love the story that it told, and I love the way that it was done versus as much as I do like this Alice in Wonderland movie, like I said, which I do, it's got so much to benefit off of, being that it's 35 years later or whatever, to do this movie as opposed to a different movie like Return. But yeah, I always thought it was just kind of cool. I like the idea of, being more into the storybook as well, because you've got like the classic Disney cartoon of Alice in Wonderland, which I'm a big fan of, but it doesn't go into too many crazy characters, but it makes mention of them, makes mention of things like the Jabberwocky, and then you have you know, the tale of the what is it? The like the sea creature and the guy, the that are like going around the building or whatever. I forget what it is, but the whole Alice in Wonderland cartoon movie is like tells like stories inside of stories.
Yeah.
I love, you know, the way that they even use characters like, Tweedledee and Tweedledum in this movie. But I also really love the portrayal of like the Cheshire Cat in this movie, where he was kind of that like kind of creepy, but more just playfully odd type character in the original cartoon. There's something very just kind of unique and stalkerish about the way that the Cheshire Cat is portrayed in Tim Burton's version.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. He's definitely a lot more where he's playful in the original ones, but this one he's more mischievous and he's more like you're not 100% sure whether or not he's a good guy or a bad guy in this the whole entire time. He's just kind of odd and stuff like that. And then obviously, with Alan Rickman playing the caterpillar, I love the fact that it's just great to see hear that and stuff like that with that. But yeah. I mean, like I said, I think it's kind of cool. I think the girl they had Mia who played Alice. I liked it. I read somewhere that eventually at one point Tim Burton really wanted to use Frances Cobain, which is Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love's daughter, but apparently things must have not have worked out or something like that, or maybe like Disney was like, yeah, we don't want an Alice character for someone who hasn't acted maybe or something like that, even though she is kind of like celebrity in her own right because of who her
Yeah.
mother and father was. But maybe they were like, yeah, we want to kind of go with somebody newish, but somebody who still has
See,
somewhat of a chops and scenes and things like that, obviously because she's playing a main character, so you don't want to throw all your eggs in the basket
yeah.
and Francis not be able to to deliver. So I mean, I get to that point, especially when it come to Disney. They're like you said, these productions are super, super high and super expensive, and it's like, yeah, yeah, we're putting all this money, and that's why, like, probably Tim, prefers those ones where he's more, even though he's always done these movies that are big and lavish, but like with that Disney, I can imagine with Disney back, the producers and all that stuff like that. You probably had a Disney rep behind him the whole entire time, going, "Yeah, you can't say that, or you can't do this, can't do that." So it was probably pretty annoying the fact that he's like, "Okay, man, like you didn't like me before, now you're asking me to do this," and it's like, "Okay, yeah, we'll come back to it." But yeah, I mean, I enjoy this film. I think it's even though he didn't do the Looking Glass, I still find this one better than that movie. I wasn't too particularly fond of the second film, and like I said, I mean it's fun and it kind of it kind of goes like I said when you go into I mean I know we're gonna say the word slump and we've talked about that with directors and stuff like that where they've got a couple big movies and then they have a couple ones that are I'm like with Tim you can't even the slumpy movies you can't really consider them slumps because they
Yeah.
still made crap load of money they still did stuff they just weren't as good as some of these other Tim Burton films, and that's kind of like how this goes. I mean, you went from Sweeney Todd that was super big, super popular, everybody liked it, blah blah blah. Alice in Wonderland, you kind of get into that where some people like it, some people don't like it. There's like that, and goes right into the next film that he did, which is another reboot, a retelling of a story that people know. Obviously the people who are fond of British television shows when he did did almost said Dark Knight, Dark Shadows. When he
Dark
did Dark
Shadow.
Shadows, and like I said, it's one of those ones too where Dark Shadows is very, very controversial in the fan wise
Yeah.
of some people like it, some people didn't like it. There were people in the middle, and like I said, I know you'll get into it, but that's what I said. I was like, for being a vampire movie and being a vampire-ish, which I get because in the original series you didn't really know anything about that until later on the vampire-ish. I understand that they kind of went straight into it, and there's some weird shit and fun shit in this movie.
Yeah.
But since it is a vampire movie, I'll let you break into it a little bit more vampire-ish.
The thing about this movie, though, is like I give so much credit and kudos to Tim and Johnny for even tackling this movie because this is a hardcore rabbit fan base movie. Like, well, the concept because I love Dark Shadows. That show was like 26 seasons, like 1100 episodes. Like incredibly insane, like really rabid. It's like, it's like General Hospital for gothic people, just something that's so endless. My I'm For me, I'm in the middle of this. I love Dark Shadows, the TV show. I am fond of this movie because of Johnny Depp, playing this character, Tim Burton putting his spin on it, it being a vampy movie and being, kind of the first real Tim Burton like vampire movie and stuff like that. And I love Johnny as a character actor. I mean, I'm a Johnny Depp fan regardless. I am. So I pretty much go see anything he's in just because he's Johnny Depp. But I really, I really hated the flow of this movie. I felt it wasn't designed well. And as far as the story that it was trying to tell versus the story you kind of felt like you were getting. And that was the part that kind of bothered me is I'm very big on staying in the fantasy. And I felt that just the way that this movie was edited is made it very difficult to stay in the fantasy. And that was the part that I found particularly tricky about this. It was kind of all over the place. They're bringing in werewolves at the end of this movie. People are falling through ceilings in funny ways. It was just very strangely shot. And I found it to be just kind of a bizarre execution. I do enjoy the movie. The fact that it's got original cast members in it from the show. Of course, I love that. But yeah, it's just that was a hard sell, man. And of course, I've got my physical copy that sits right over there, with all my other vampy stuff right next to Dark Shadows, collections. And I've got that big ass coffin full collection that they did. Like it's really cool. And like I truly enjoy the movie for what it's worth. And I love the show for everything it was able to execute. I just felt that this was a very hard sell, very tricky for Tim.
Yeah.
Um, but I appreciate the effort, and I really do give kudos for tackling a project like that because making a movie off something pre-existing is hard enough, but making a movie based on something pre-existing that has that much fucking source material is an insane task to take on. But overall, I like it. It's fun. It's
Yeah.
flirty, but it's not going to be anywhere near my top five.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was a fan of the original TV series. I wouldn't go as far as saying I was a fanatic of the TV series. There are other British shows that we've talked about before, that like Monty Python and Mr. Bean and things like that, that I was more into of that comedy. But I
Yeah.
still did love Dark Shadows, obviously, because of the my love of vampire stuff and things like that. I did like it, but I mean, I wasn't a rabid base fan for that. So for me, like my opinion of when going to see this movie, I was just kind of like, it's kind of like going and seeing, that, people who were fans of like the M Night Shyamalan when he did the Avatar, the Last Airbender. To me, I didn't mind it because I didn't watch the Avatar stuff, so I had no idea. So I really couldn't compare it to it. I compare, this a little bit more because I've seen a lot of the stuff. I wouldn't go as far as saying I've seen every Dark Shadows episode, but I've seen a decent amount of them. But I mean, but with this one, I mean, I love Johnny's portrayal of Barnaby. I think he did
Yep.
a really good job. His character. I love Michelle Pfeiffer's character in this movie. I thought it was great. I thought what's his name? God, the fucking guy who played the Freddy Krueger that nobody likes. I liked his character in it,
Oh,
the groundskeeper or whatever like that. I
yeah.
thought he was cool. I didn't really care too much about Eva Green's character.
Yeah,
I liked
Jackie Earl Haley.
yeah, Jackie O'Hara. Yeah, I wasn't really too fond on Eva Green's character. I get the point of it and the curse. Yeah, and then like obviously like you said, you throw in the werewolves and
It
all that
was
stuff like that.
weird.
And then you got like this stellar cast, and then you throw back a guy who I haven't seen in a long time, even though I think he's done movies, but it hadn't been anything that I remember seeing big. But you got like Johnny Lee Miller. I'm a huge like Hackers fan and stuff like that, and he's in a movie for like a couple minutes because he's a shit asshole dad that'd rather take the money than watch his kids. So it was like, what was the whole point of him being in this whole movie the whole entire time? Like, this
That's
character
the
could have just been not written whatsoever. It's just like, yeah, it's just weird stuff. And then, obviously, the Alice Cooper, being in the movie, and then them doing it was funny because, we see like the Alice Cooper that we know now, especially even when this film was being made, it was Chuck in the band and Nita, and them and Strauss in the band. But I thought it was kind of cool because it was the '70s version of Alice Cooper's band, so the players they had to be very. I like the fact that they made him look a lot younger, and like I think it's cool with a lot of them people doing that deep dive in the CGI. They just put a little bit of makeup and the lighting on Alice and made him look younger. They didn't do any like hardcore like prosthetics or CGI on him. I mean, even though like I said, he looks the same as he did in the '70s when he was wearing that stuff. Obviously time has taken a little bit of a toll on him because he's got wrinkly skin like the rest of us usually do. But I thought they did a really good job on that. I love that, when he walks, obviously the line when Johnny Barnabas walks in goes, ugliest woman I've ever seen.
oh,
Because every time,
love
because the whole entire time they're like, when's this girl coming in? I love the fact that they just keep playing with Alice Cooper as being Alice the whole entire time, and they keep going she the whole entire.
Yeah. And just like you said, Devil, I'll just kind of end it on this. I was like that's those points right before the Alice segment was just kind of my point in it, where it was like it's care I felt they wrote in care like you said, they wrote in characters that they just didn't need to write in. Like there isn't need to for this asshole character for 3 minutes. There's no need to have this just sudden werewolf like situation because there was no build up to it. I understood the nature of the conflict at the end for that scene, but there was no build up whatsoever involving this character. They just kind of sprang out, no pun intended, like randomly. And it was, I remember literally sitting in the theater watching that movie and kind of being like, huh, okay, I guess that's a thing now. And then 10 minutes later, the movie ended, and I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, what did
Yeah.
it have to do with anything?
Yeah, yeah, especially because like at least with with Barnabas' character, he got cursed and the
Yeah.
family curse. So it's like I get the family curse, but the family curse was really only on him, not anybody else. So, and even the mom, when she turned in, she's like, "Yeah, I'm a werewolf. Get over with." Like even she didn't even know. So it's just like kind of like okay, like I get the boy and the ghost, his mother and stuff like that. I get that part of that stuff. That part of the story I didn't mind as much. And like I said, I like Chloe Mortis. I like her character in the movie. I think she's funny. She's the one that, obviously, suggests that they get Alice Cooper. And she's this very like '70s girl. You can definitely tell, that hippie kind of teenager smoking pot. So I didn't mind her character as much. But yeah, the whole I'm just gonna throw a werewolf into the mix. All of a sudden, it's like okay, and then have no
Yeah.
explanation of why she's a werewolf or why she became a werewolf. It's just like werewolf, and then she disappears, and then there's no explanation again.
I was so annoyed by that. Just because, like, I love werewolves as much as the next person, but that pissed me off because I was like, why, where, how, when?
Yeah,
No, that's not going to be a thing. So that's my black eye on that movie. But it's all right. It just is what it is. It's but it's still in the big picture for most of the movie. it's an enjoyable time. But let's bring this a little bit 38 years full circle there, my friend, and talk a little bit about, or return to, or spring forward, however you want to look at it. Let's re let's rediscuss Frankenweenie.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, I love this. Like I said, I'm fond of the original one, but yeah, just like anything else, a lot of people were bitching about stuff, and it's like, when the two things that I always come into mind, even before we get into this, when people talk about stuff, is like, you make a Grinch, the Grinch television, just the cartoon. It's a 15, 20 minute cartoon, then you make it in a full length movie. Obviously, you have to embellish on stuff, add new characters, but for that, you get like Where the Wild Things Are. People didn't really like that, movie, but it's like it's a book that literally is like 30 pages and each page has like 6 words on it. It literally takes you like 10 minutes as a kid to read this book. So to make it to an hour and a half, hour plus movie, you have to exaggerate and kind of push things. And that's what I loved about this movie, where yeah, it still had a lot of that premise of Frankenweenie, a lot of same scenes in the very beginning, making the monster movie and him coming out, obviously him getting killed and him bringing him back as Frankenstein and stuff like that. But I love how this one elaborates a little bit more because it's got, him going to school and you have the other characters. You have the Igor character and you have the girl and things like that. And them trying to bring back, their animals and it getting chaos and it's going crazy. I love that, that little extra elaborating of throwing that stuff into this movie and stuff like that. But it's cool. I love the fact that, obviously they play some puns on some stuff and there's some extra stuff in it. I love the fact that it is the first stop animation film to be filmed in 3D, which is really really cool because most 3D cartoons obviously are all digitally done and animated and things like that. So I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, it's I like I said, I mean, I'm a fan of this movie. I was a fan of the original one. Yes, I particularly like the original one better, maybe mainly just because what I grew up watching. But I thought this was a really cool version of this. I just thought it was just a cool movie. I loved the characters. I love the people that they obviously come back and do the voices like Winona, Catherine. You got Martin Short, Martin Landau. You got Tom Kenny, who's freaking SpongeBob doing a voice in this too. So it's so cool.
No, it is, man. I love this movie, Devil. I've always loved this movie, and I love fan intuition, fan theories, and fun things. And I love the fact that Frank and Weenie kind of brought this trilogy of curiosities between three Tim Burton movies, as like a thing with the fan theories and beliefs between Frank and Weenie, Corpse Bride, and Nightmare Before Christmas, where you've got Frank and Weenie who ultimately then becomes scraps of Corpse Bride, who ultimately becomes Zero in Nightmare Before Christmas. You've got, Victor, turning into Jack Skellington. You've got, the fact that Sally was created, but what does that have to potentially do with Elizabeth and stuff like that? Like it's just a very I love the ideas of playing off these characters and just being like, hey, this works. Was this the plan? Are we meeting people back when they were really people? Did we already see them in the afterlife? That kind of thing. So I enjoy that kind of fun stuff. I love discussions and I love fan theories. But yeah, man, when it comes to Frank and Weenie, it's a fun one. It's a good time. I love because I feel that while you had to create filler, obviously, to stretch, a 30-minute short into an hour and 30-minute film, um, they did it I think very well. I think the story made sense, the characters made sense, and the casting was great. So I definitely think Frank and Weenie's awesome. And,
Yeah, yeah.
I've always enjoyed that one.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's cool too because it's like you take this the town of this movie. That's what I love about this too. It's like it's like, the polar opposite of, of something like Edward Scissorhands, where, you have that town and everybody's kind of cookie cutter looking, very nice and proper and all that stuff like that. And you have Edward Scissorhands, who's kind of this oddball kind of guy coming in, where this
Yep.
town is it's very gothy. Like all these kids look like they're dead already. It looks like everyone's creepy. It's got that Tim Burton kind of look with the big eyes and the kind of
Yep.
sunken in face. Like obviously the one character is Igor, so he's obviously walking with the slump and talking like Igor does. I just love the fact that like all these characters, even in this, even like even the Asian character is still
Yeah.
very like an oddball character. It's like this town and this school is very like it's very gothy, very like these are the misfits, Misfits Island kind of like gave me a little bit of that feel of
Mhm.
like that, where it was like, yeah, these are the kids that are kind of misunderstood, but everybody in that whole entire, even a scene where you see all the kids, every one of them looks, even though for him, Tim, Vincent, and all them are all weirdos and stuff like that, and they kind of make fun of everybody. But everybody in that school looked really weird anyway, too. So it's like calling the kettle black, where like you're weird looking. I'm like, have you all looked at yourselves too? You're all pretty
Totally,
weird
dude.
looking too.
It's like Paranorman if
Yeah,
all of the main characters were dead.
yeah,
Like instead of them being able to speak to dead people, it's just they are dead, you
yeah,
know. But it's a cool movie. Great shot, great, design, and just a whole lot of fun. And speaking of other things that are a whole lot of fun, let's talk a little bit about Miss Peregrine's motherfucking Home for Peculiar
yeah.
Children as fucking Samuel L. Jackson makes his way into the Tim Burton universe.
I'm tired of these motherfucking kids in this motherfucking school. That's what I wanted the whole entire time, man. We didn't get that. But yeah, like I said, when I came to, like I said, with Eva Green being in Dark Shadows, I didn't really particularly like, not saying I didn't like her, I just like that character wise was kind of
Yeah.
I love her in this movie. I thought she did very well in this movie. I love the story of this. I love the craziness of like in and out of like different time periods and different time things, and it's all like kind of looping and time loops and things like
Mhm.
that. I love the fact that it's like very, weird with these kids, and you have the one girl that can float away. You have the other girl who like has the mouth behind her head. I love that when she was like everybody's eating at the table and she was like afraid to eat, and he was like, no, go be yourself, and all of a sudden she like puts the big chicken bone in the back of her head and chomps it down. I just loved it. I thought this was a cool movie. I wasn't really particularly, well known into the universe of this, of the books and things like
Books.
that. And so just like just so I wasn't, so for me, like I can't really compare it. I know some people probably like this, or maybe some people maybe not didn't like it because of how you take your source material and you make it into something different. So like
Yeah.
but for me, like I said, not knowing that source material, not having any idea of the source material at all when I seen this, I enjoyed it. I think it was a fun film. Yeah, I wouldn't put it, like I said, it's definitely not on the top list of
Yeah.
Tim Burton films, but yeah, I put it in there somewhere in the middle. It's definitely not on the bottom.
No, definitely. I love Allison Janney's character. Like I'm a fan of Allison Janney just in general. Like she just
Yeah,
does so many kooky roles. I mean, there'll be like real roles that like make sense, even just something as simple as, when she's, the guidance counselor lady in 10 Things I Hate About You. Like
yeah,
just has this way of doing like really, really cool roles, and I'm just a big fan of like the stuff that she does. But even I love the fact that she voiced, the the Margot character in the Addams Family cartoon movie. I just think she's really, really interesting. But no, I like the idea of doing this movie, and I kind of, at least as of right now, I like the fact that this movie was also done as a standalone movie. Again, despite the fact that there is mountains of source material to continue the franchise on. But sometimes I just feel like the overall, you know, tribute to something, can suffice. It's like, hey, we know that there's a lot of this, which also means that like it can get picked apart because there's gonna be so many holes or so many this and that, but just showing your love of something and your curiosities behind exploring it into film is something that I really liked about the fact that they did this movie. And it was fun watching Samuel L. Jackson as a shapeshifter. I mean, Mr. Barron was a cool character, and I liked it. And yeah, we didn't get those coup de grace, Samuel L. Jackson quotes, but at the same time, I did like the fact that you know, I did like the fact that like you knew it was Samuel L. Jackson, but at the same time, it worked with all of his deliveries. I thought enhanced his scenes really well.
Yeah, I think yeah, and the way he looked a little bit, it kind of just reminded me of like him and him in the as Mr. Glass in the M Night film,
True.
with the little bit of white hair, a little bit of the white hair and that and stuff like that. Yeah, I just thought it was I thought this was a cool movie, a cool concept. Like I said, I thought it was well executed and things like that. So it's like one of those ones where, like I said, I didn't really know too much about it, but when I went in and watched it, I was like, okay, that was a cool one. And like I said, it's not one that I'm particularly going to put in all the time, but if I'm bored and trying to watch something, I'll throw it in. I've seen it a couple times before prior to watching it again for our Tim Burton episode. So
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, I was really big into that, and like I said, I love the way that Tim Burton does things, and like even when we talked about a little bit earlier with him doing the Ed Wood story and stuff like that about doing things about a true life person, obviously Ed Wood and the characters and the actors that did stuff like that were real people, and then he went. Tim Burton, like he said, he likes to go back to these actors. He likes to go back to these themes. He likes to go back to all this kind of stuff. Does that with the next one with a lot of people don't probably particularly know about this movie and or don't know very much about the source material. Now, to
Yep.
me personally, I remember when this movie came out, I remember seeing it, I saw it. I wasn't really big into the story behind it all. I knew it
Yeah.
was based on a true story, but I didn't really know that much about it. But it made sense once I started diving into it after watching it. I love Big Eyes. I think this movie is amazing. I love the fact that when you see these drawings of the big eyed kids and stuff like that this girl made, you go, oh, of course, this is going to be a Tim Burton, but you got to realize this was like 20, 30 years before Tim Burton. So you can definitely tell the inspiration of a lot of his characters with when he made his characters with the big eyes and the kind of sunken in faces and stuff like that. You can definitely tell Tim Burton was inspired by her and by like her drawings and her paintings. That he's even actually said that he has a couple of them. He actually owns a few original paintings from her. But I love it. I just thought it was a cool. I think this is a cool movie. I think it's especially at the time period because of the time where she leaves her husband, she goes away, and she does these drawings, and then all of a sudden her this new guy comes into the storyline, and he's basically just as bad as her ex husband that she was running away from, and the whole entire time that she's making these paintings and all these children and everybody loves them and falls in love with all these things and it becomes this big huge money maker that he pretends like he's the guy that's behind it. I know even like I said, I love the fact that they use the real people. Like even the girl that the story is about, she's in one scene when she's talking to the husband about the painting. She's actually sitting behind them in the bench, and obviously before she passed away and stuff like that. So I think that's cool. I think it's really cool. Like especially like my favorite part of the whole entire movie was they spoiling into the going to the end of the movie. But I love the fact that yeah, they're eventually she ends up going screw this and I'm fighting for these kids, I'm fighting for this project and all this stuff because these kids are mine. And they go to the court and the guy's like, okay, I'm tired of this shit, we're gonna do a paint off, which is what really happened. And
Yeah.
and that painting that she holds out at the end was exactly what it was. It was the painting that she just did where he couldn't paint on my arm, making all these excuses. And the times she made it, and then it was, obviously it became to the point where it's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like that's what I said. Watching this whole entire movie, you're like, oh god, not knowing as far as what all happened until afterwards when I found out about all this stuff.
Yeah.
God damn it, fucking scammers calling me again. Anyway, but yeah, like not knowing all that kind of stuff like that, So I was just like watching this movie. I'm like, oh man, this guy's an asshole like that. And then once that judge says, "Oh, paint off," you're like, oh, this guy's fucked, and she's just sitting there the whole time, just painting
Yeah.
it, and he's just like doing. I just love that. It was just like a big huge like, yeah, fuck you. I know what I'm doing.
No, for sure. I had been familiar with this movie forever, just being a Tim Burton fan, but I really never gave it the time of day. I knew the source material, and I understood that he was doing another biopic, however, whatever the proper
Yeah,
terminology is for it. Like, I knew he was doing another biopic type movie similar to Ed Wood, and I was familiar with that, but I it didn't. Again, I'm not a trailers guy, so sometimes I can kind of like disservice myself when I don't watch things because I'm very steadfast in how much I dislike trailers because I feel they give away all the best stuff or just give away things that are particularly important that it would have been better to learn or better to see. So I'm not the world's biggest trailers guy, like and a little bit of a disservice comes with that because I'll hear of these movies or I'll see posters or something or a minute or like a teaser trailer that doesn't give anything away, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's cool, that's nice," and then I'll just kind of go about my day, and then it's like then I find out later where it's like, "Damn, that was cool." So actually watching this movie, I really like enjoyed it. And I was like, yeah, I chalk that one up to a disservice, but it just kind of happens. But I loved the setup to the movie. I love the style behind it. I like the fact that you were like, oh, is it really as bad as they say? But then when they got down to it and it became that paint off was when I was kind of like, oh yeah, no, they're going in hard. And yeah, this dude's just fucking dead where he stands. So it was really cool to discover this movie. So, because I had watched it when we decided to do the episode, as I was kind of starting to get going, and then I rewatched it closer to our conversation to kind of freshen it up a little bit since of all of his catalog, it was the one that I had the least experience with. I was like, let's pop through this one more time and just have a little bit of a stronger grip on it. And it was definitely a cool movie, and it's definitely something that I look forward to revisiting down the line again, and just
yeah.
checking out and sitting back with that for sure. And moving into our next one, man, I've been looking forward to this because just the idea of having a conversation about a Tim Burton version of your favorite Disney movie is something that I have been very, very much looking forward to. So, like you did with Dark Shadows, please, Devil, dude, take it away.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, everybody, like I said, everybody knows my love for Pee Wee Herman and stuff like that. So, like I said, and even with this one, precursor, yeah, I'm like when it comes to animated Disney films, Dumbo has always been my number one. Obviously, my favorite Disney film of all time is definitely Something Wicked This Way Comes as far as live action, but I've been a huge Dumbo fan, which is weird because you would think that I would be more into the 80s and late 70s, 80s, and early 90s Disney films, because like I said, Dumbo is from like the freaking 30s or something. Like it's like one of the original kind of animated films as far as Disney and stuff like that. But yeah, I've been a huge fan of that. So when I found out about a remake of Dumbo, I was like everybody else, I'm like, "Ugh, fuck you! I don't want no
Yeah.
remake of this. Like, I don't want live action version of this. Movie's all right, even though it does have its problems. Yes, I mean it was made in a different time. There's definitely a lot of things in it that isn't PC friendly as far as the original ones and stuff like that. But I mean, in general, like that movie's not really meant to hurt anyone. I mean, I understand some of those characters were definitely characterizations of a culture that some people didn't find very particularly fond of when they made it. But like I said, that's here and there. Like I said, the whole story and the premise of it is just this mother and son love. Obviously, Big Dumbo, and then Dumbo's mom and stuff like that, and just like that this this ability to be a freak in the world and find out that you can use what everybody's kind of making fun of you, and that what considers you a freak is actually the better thing. Almost kind of like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. They're making fun of him as this reindeer that has a glowing nose. He's the only one that doesn't have a glowing nose. Oh, you're a weirdo kid. But then eventually, whenever he saves the day, like, oh yeah, we all want to be like you, and it comes to that. So, when this remake was getting called, I'm like, okay. And then I heard it was Tim Burton, and I was like, again, it was like that one of those ones where I'm like, okay, if anybody's gonna touch Dumbo, I'll let Tim Burton. And like I said, I mean, premising the film, I still love this film. I think it's amazing. I still love the story. Is it the original one? No, I'm still gonna put that in a higher regards as far as a movie wise. But I mean, I love this version of it. I know a lot of people just didn't like it. It's got so much shit on it, whereas like that, I'm like, okay, you gotta look at the time when this movie was being made, the movies that Disney were remaking live action weren't really a big thing. It's one of the earlier ones. Like there are some that are really good. I really love the Jungle Book version, the live action of that and stuff like that. But then there were a couple other ones that were really really shitty. So when you look at it as a whole, like you go with like the Lion King live action one and the some of the other ones that they've done, you're like, ugh, they're
Oh,
really really bad compared to like this. I thought this was really cool, and I think it's a very Tim Burton esque film of it. I love the fact that they do put little things in it from the original, even though it doesn't have some of that stuff. With like Timothy being in it, he's only in it for a couple seconds, but you see him as a mouse. Obviously, the part where they sing obviously in the original cartoon when mom's leaving and Dumbo's crying, the mom's singing baby of mine throughout the whole entire time. And obviously in this film, the animals don't talk, so it's very normal. So I love the fact that okay, you're not having any of these animal talk and do all this stuff like that. How are you going to still do that one of the most iconic songs and scenes in Dumbo? Well, Tim Burton's like, I'll figure out a way, and he has the carnival people singing the "Baby of Mine" song, which I
yep.
love the fact that they did that. So I was like, I love all the little throwbacks to the original one. They talk about give them out, give them, the pink elephants and talk about the pink elephants and things like that. I love that. And it's like the whole cool scene. I just love that. I love the imagery of this. I love the bigness scale of it. I love the circus. I mean, obviously you bring back a lot of characters like Michael Keaton. You got Colin Farrell coming into it, but you got Danny DeVito basically kind of reprising his role from Big Fish a little bit.
A little
He's a
bit,
carnival barker, and now he's this big carnival guy in this. So it's like, well, it's like who am I gonna get to be the carnival guy? Well, Danny did really good in that Big Fish. Let's just bring him back again.
no, absolutely, man, for sure. And we as we bring it to a close, man, we'll go from your expertise to my expertise. Not that you're not super duper expertise on this, but I just genuinely love this franchise, as people know. But let's talk a little bit in closing as we circle again one more time and revisit the Beetlejuice franchise with Beetlejuice. And we all saw this together, man. It was you, it was me, it was Mrs. Devil, it was Mrs. Vamp, and we had a really good time when it came to this. And like I like this movie. I actually like this movie quite a lot. I thought they did a really excellent job. And it is incredibly difficult in any movie to do a sequel many, many years later. But overall, I thought the execution was really great. I thought the character use was awesome. I liked the way they infused some new characters, and I thought they also did a really good job with subtle comedic hints back to previous situations. So, you and I got to meet Bob in person, at a horror con. I love the fact that Bob, the shrunken head character, was a little bit more of a valued character. Michael Keaton returning as Beetlejuice, but having serious screen time as opposed to, 7 minutes in an hour and a half, hour, 45-minute movie. I loved Winona Ryder's kind of doped up, like paranoid mother character trying to be a good mom. I love, Catherine O'Hara still just crazy Delia, just doing Delia things, but also bringing in characters like, of course, Astrid, which is Jen Ortega's character, is Winona Ryder's daughter. But I also loved Monica Bellucci's character as the Soul Sucker. I thought that was so great. And the fact that as she's coming back to life, coming, stapling herself back from being boxed up in pieces. I love the fact that one of the things that she had to reattach to herself was her ring finger, which Beetlejuice pulled out of his pocket in the first movie when proposing to Lydia. Just so many fun things about this. Look, is it is it going to be better? Is it going to be in a future better sequel showdown? Absolutely not. Not a chance in hell. Beetlejuice is still the elite when it comes to the franchise. But for a movie that took so much time to come together and so many people had to sign off on it, I really thought they did a good job. I think it's super entertaining. I bought it right away when it came out, not only to have a physical copy in my collection, but to have the ability to watch it whenever I wanted, because it really did bring me some joy. I genuinely enjoyed it. And I will say I found it very tasteful with the way that they used a character who in my opinion, you couldn't just ignore, because I think he was incredibly important to the first movie. Um, but I like the way that they tastefully had written him out based off a real life situation that is tasteless. Um, but I thought it made sense. And I got some good chuckles out of that character, of course, knowing what I know in real life, but liking the fact that they found a way to have him seriously involved in this movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love the like the fact that they obviously, like I said, with Charles Dietz's character. I love the fact that they just kind of went the animated route, with him, and then obviously when he's in the real world, he's just a guy with his half of his body gone from a shark attack, so you could pretty much have anybody in there and just kind of just gurgle his voice or whatever to make him sound like whatever. You don't need to use his real voice or whatever. Like, so I thought that was a cool, because that's what we were all kind of wondering. We knew obviously from the trailers and some of the pictures and stuff that that he had passed away, because that's where they were at the funeral and things like that. But I was just kind of wondering how they were gonna do that. Same thing with, like, with them, talking about Adam and Barbara's character, about them finding a loophole and figuring out the way to go. But they, even in the very beginning, I remember seeing it, and a lot of people didn't realize it, but I remember seeing it in the theater. But like in the very beginning with the model and stuff like that, you see a little model of Adam and Barbara on the bottom of the where they fell into the water. You see them for like a quick glimpse and stuff like that. But I thought that was
Yeah,
kind of
right,
cool.
right by the covered bridge.
Yeah, I did like the fact that, like you said, you had that detail with the missing finger from her and stuff like that, and the fact that, in the first movie they asked, his Beetlejuice's qualifications, and he talked about living in the Black Plague, and they show you him in the Black Plague. Obviously he was a grave robber, and was like robbing freaking graves and robbing people and stuff like that. I thought the switch of language and making it into like an Italian film, and the thing was kind of weird.
It
But
was so
even
weird.
even even in the thing too, even later on in the movie where you hear, the when they're singing and they're talking about the cake melting in the rain song. I completely, like, I remember hearing that song, and for the longest, man, I'm a huge Weird Al fan, and I remember his Jurassic Park is frightening in the dark
Yes.
song. But
Yeah.
for me, I always thought that was an original song. I
Oh,
know he
really?
does a lot of parodies for a while, but for the longest time, I mean, I think when it came out, and then later on, like years later, I remember hearing about that song. But like when it came out, I thought maybe it was one of Weird Al's originals, because he does throw some originals in there once in a while. But again, then all of a sudden, like, I completely forgot about that song, even though, like I said, I remember. And then when it played in the movie, I'm like, are they doing Jurassic Park is frightening in the dark? And then all of a sudden the song lyrics came. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That was the McCarthy's Park is frightening in the dark song or
Yeah,
whatever like that.
MacArthur Park. Yeah,
Yeah, which is kind of funny though, because people who don't know, the guy who actually originally wrote that song and sung it first, Richard Harris, was Dumbledore, the original Dumbledore from Harry Potter. So I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, I love the Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice, like you said, I'm not going to go off and say that it's definitely a better sequel. It definitely wasn't. You can tell we've talked about it before off air and to other people that feel like Tim Burton basically had 36 years of ideas and kind of threw it all into one. That's the one thing that I will say about Beetlejuice that I found a little disheartening is it's just way too much stuff going on at one time. There's
it
way too many
does.
different plots going on. There's this thing, you got her, you got Astrid going after the boy, you got him trying to kill, you got that, you got the dad that can dive, you got that guy, you got Beetlejuice, you got his girl that he's going after, you got the guy that's trying to marry Lydia and stuff like that. It's just it's way too much storyline. Like where the original Beetlejuice was such a good movie because it was just one linear story. Well, this is like 17 different stories all coming
It's
into one. It's like,
it's
okay, I'm
very
probably not
cluttered.
gonna make a Beetlejuice 3, which actually I heard is supposed to be a Beetlejuice 3 now. So now it's kind of like, well, now you really didn't need to put all those storylines into one because if you were thinking, oh, I'm never gonna do a Beetlejuice 3, so let me just put all these cool storylines that I've had for Beetlejuice but never came out and did it into this one. But now that the rumors are, at least as far as that, it's still rumors, but I'm assuming that they probably will just because, it's like, why not? But then again, who knows? Like I said, Tim Burton has always come out and said he doesn't do sequels. I know he did, obviously he did Batman 2, which I don't, he doesn't really consider a sequel, but it's a continuation. But obviously, Beetlejuice is definitely a sequel. So it'd be kind of funny where it's like, is they going to do it? And then it goes to the question whether or not if Beetlejuice, I'm assuming they'll call it,
Yeah,
which is going to be funny because you can't even say the name's title without conjuring him. So I
right.
wonder if they'll play off of that where it's like Beetlejuice times three because we're not allowed to say it three times or something like that. Or play
Or
something off of that.
Beetlejuice Beetle or something like
Yeah,
that.
or something like that because you're not
Beetlejuice.
allowed to say it three times. But
Dot
yeah,
dot dot.
it'd be kind of interesting if it does get filmed, if whether or not Tim's gonna do it because of the continuation of like him not doing sequels. I think he will just because he did the sequel to this now, so he can get out of his mind. But it'd be kind of interesting if he doesn't. Who's gonna put the reins? Because like, who wants to go and fill those shoes, man? Like,
No.
I do not want to. I do not want, especially because like I said, people were bitching about. Yeah, there are people who didn't like Beetlejuice as much, but for the majority of people who are actual Beetlejuice fans and are real actual Beetlejuice fans, most of us loved it. We loved it. We thought it was good. Yes, it has its problematics and the fact that yeah, it's definitely not going to shine versus the original Beetlejuice, but we love it to the point where, you know, Beetlejuice 3, Beetlejuice 4, Beetlejuice 5, shit. I'd be cool with them reanimating the animated series again and just doing the series again. I love the fact that, it's 30 some years later and we can talk about Beetlejuice now like we did when we were kids, because there was a long time, even though a lot of us talked about Beetlejuice, that time in the 90s, in the mid 90s to 2000 to 2015, Beetlejuice was really not in most people's minds. Some people knew it, and the younger
Yeah,
generation that knew it mainly because the older generation showing them. But I love the fact that it's a character that hasn't been around for 30 some years that people still go out and crazy. You go to Hot Topics and buy all the shit. You buy the Beetlejuice stuff. You buy this. It's cool that you can still market a character like that that hadn't been around for 30 years. And like you said, even a character that didn't, in the original film didn't have, had 10, 15 minutes of screen time or less than
yeah.
that. You know what I mean? So for somebody who, didn't have a lot of screen time, he was obviously you got to have him in the movie. The title of the movie is his
The
name,
title of the
so
movie and the
yeah,
guys in the
so
movie
you
for
can't really
minutes.
you can't really not have him in the movie. But it is kind of weird that you would even taking that kind of gamble, which we didn't even really talk about that in the original Beetlejuice. But even taking a gamble as far as Tim Burton doing the original Beetlejuice is like, you know, them doing, Michael Keaton being Beetlejuice, and the title of it being Beetlejuice, and putting a character that's not predominantly a featured character. He's not a main character. I mean, he's a subnote made character, but he's not the main character. Like you said, he doesn't get. I mean, shit. Even Charles Dietz and those guys and the mom get a lot more screen time than
Yeah.
Beetlejuice does. So it's, you got to give him props for, even though this is a Beetlejuice movie, you're not going to see him that much. And it's cool that Michael Keaton was kind of like, okay, some actors nowadays would be like, wait, I'm the title role and I'm getting 7 minutes out of an hour and a half. No, no, no. I'm going to talk to my agent and my lawyers. We're going to make that about 7 minutes less than the whole film I'm in it. You know what I mean? A lot of actors nowadays with the prima donna acting would have been like, yeah, I'm not taking this role where I'm the title role, but I get less time than Juno, the caseworker.
Dude, it's funny. I think Otho had more screen
Yeah.
time than Beetlejuice.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Shit,
But nah,
The Deo song had more
damn.
time.
Yeah.
Was called back more times than Beetlejuice probably was.
No, and I love the fact that like songs can just become a thing. Like, you know, and Beetlejuice just has that ability. Those movies have the ability to just have these obscure songs just become like a thing, like obviously with Harry Belafonte, with not only just Deo, but also with Shake Sonora,
Yeah.
and then in this movie, we had already talked about MacArthur Park from, written, Jimmy Webb, but then you also had Tragedy from Bee Gees when
Yeah.
Monica Bellucci was putting her anatomy back together. Like I
Yep.
remember watching that being like, they have a Bee Gees song of all. I love the fact it was Tragedy, and I love the fact that the name of the song is Tragedy, but I also like the song in general. But I was
Yeah.
like, they're playing a fucking Bee Gees song while this like soul sucking demonic character succubus thing is recreating herself. Just so fun, so interesting. But yeah, so we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait. If it's say it once, say it twice, three times the charm. We're gonna have to see if we get a three times the charm, which in all things go, and I think we're going to, like, based off the reaction of it, I kind of think it's gonna happen. I mean, fuck, dude, we've got 7 Scream movies, dude.
Yeah.
So it's like I feel like they're gonna find a way to make Beetlejuice 3 happen. So we'll definitely have to wait when it comes to that. But this has been a good one there, Devil. Like we've done now a big collection of director slash writer slash producer episodes, but man, this one was fun. Like really getting a deep dive into all of Tim Burton. And again, man, my appreciation to you as I kind of pushed for us to do this episode a little early in the show's history, because like just like we discussed at the top of the show, you're not going to find a horror movie fan that doesn't like Tim Burton somewhere or something in some way. You might have horror fans that aren't big into Tim Burton outside of Sweeney Todd because they love their bloodlust. So they're like, hey, I loved how bloody Sweeney Todd was. You've got kooky and campy, so of course that love affair of like, movies like, Beetlejuice, but then you're also going to get like, gothic romance where, Corpse Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas are going to be just so strong and so beloved and all of that. But the thing that was so cool about the fun breakdown of this is really getting to talk about everything that Tim does, where it's not just that typical Tim Burton, oh, of course that's a Tim Burton movie. Like when we were talking about Big Fish, like when we were talking about Ed Wood. I like the fact that Tim is just not afraid to go there, and he will absolutely go there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. You know what I mean? Like you said, with his list, you kind of go, and you're like, okay, obviously that's Tim Burton. That's Tim Burton. Like I said, even with movies like Big Fish and Big Eyes, like I said, I mean, if I obviously some of those might be on my top five, but if I was to do like a top five of obscure Tim Burton films that most people don't know, Big Eyes and Big Fish would definitely be on the top of those. Because like I said, I've watched Big Eyes many, many times. I love that story. I think it's just a cool story. I love the fact that the factual part of it, and the fact that without Margaret, her and her ability to make these characters and these big-eyed characters, who knows? We probably might not have had a person like Tim Burton if it
Yeah,
wasn't for her, because that stylistic is very. You can, like I said, you can definitely tell he'd been, he'd been influenced by her work and her, her visuals of that before. So yeah, it's cool. It's just a weird, like I said, Tim Burton ones. It goes everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, you go from Pee Wee Herman to, to all the way down to, like, Dumbo and Beetlejuice and everything in between. It's, like I said, I love them or hate them. Yeah, some movies were controversial. Some movies, some people like, some people might not like these. But like you said, there's, I mean, even in the horror community, but just in the film community in a whole, there's not too many people out there in the world. If you like movies, you probably everybody in the world at least likes one Tim Burton film, no matter what it is, no matter if you're a comedy person or a horror person or a drama person or a sci-fi person or whatever like that. I guarantee you that at least somewhere in your catalog, or everybody in the world, whether or not DVDs or digital movies, you have a Tim Burton film in your collection. So it's kind of cool. It's like where like other ones, you know what I mean? Like we've talked about with some of the other directors like George Romero and Clive Barker. Yeah, a lot of people have a lot of them in a collection, but you're a person who's squeamish that doesn't like horror films, is predominantly likes romantic comedy movies or romance movies, and likes movies like The Notebook and things like that. Probably doesn't have a George Romero film in their collection, or a Clive Barker one in their collection, but she might be a Notebook fan. But I can guarantee you that bitch has Edward Scissorhands in her collection. You know what I mean? So she definitely has a Tim Burton film in her collection, no matter what.
absolutely does. Absolutely. And we're circling it back around one more time, Fangs and Infernos, because again, horror movies, the horror genre that we know and love, does not exist as we know it now without our beloved and departed Ozzy Osbourne, which Devil, addressed earlier as of the recording of this episode. So again, we do want to circle back around to give our love and condolences out to the Osbourne family, all of his fans, for everything that he had done. But also, I'm going to throw in one more because also, unfortunately, as of the recording of this episode, for Fangs and Infernos that don't know, and many Fangs and Infernos that do, Devil and I are very big wrestling fans. We've been wrestling fans our whole life. We're still wrestling fans to this day. And unfortunately, we have since lost the great and iconic Hulk Hogan, who really put wrestling on the map
What you talking
and
about,
really
bro?
became really became, you know, the face. He built WWE. Of course,
Yeah.
Vince McMahon and Vince McMahon Jr., of course, are the main driving force with the vision. But you need a face of your vision. And Hulk Hogan was the very first guy to put pro wrestling, sports entertainment on the map, not only as a sport, but also in pop culture. So we definitely wanted to take a second to give, again, also our condolences to Hulk Hogan's family, his wife, his children, all of his fans, and everything going when it comes to
Yeah,
that.
but with the Hulk Hogan thing too, it's crazy too about it. Like I said, a lot of people, like you said, being able to separate the man and the wrestler. Like I said, yeah, we don't here at Vampire and Devil podcast, we don't really condone everything that Perry
Absolutely.
did, but as Hulk Hogan, he was an icon. Granted, yes, like I said, I've always been a huge more Ultimate Warrior fan, but
Me
no
too.
kid that was a wrestling fan in the '80s at one point didn't love Hulk Hogan and didn't want to take his vitamins and didn't go, "Let me tell you something, brother." Everybody said that. But what's really even crazier too is that not only did we lose Hulk Hogan, but 2 months prior, we lost the guy who wrote Hulk Hogan's theme song.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we lost the guy who wrote the "I'm a Real American" song that that obviously Hulk Hogan came out. So it's kind of weird that we lost the man and the song in the same year. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely definitely a huge shout out to, like like I said, if you know any weird kids that grew up in the '80s, give them a little bit of a pat and love, because it's been a tough year. Obviously, like you said, we talked about Ozzy, we talked about obviously Hulk Hogan, and even from the Cosby show. So it's been a tough couple of days of this recording for us 80s kids growing up. So if you know anybody who's in their at least in their 40s, give them a hug because they probably need it this week.
Absolutely, they do. And as always, shout out to some of our awesome partners and sponsors, Brutalities, you know, Buffalo Bill's House, Twisted Vines. Their horror decor is absolutely fantastic. And of course, make sure that you guys are supporting small businesses like museums. So shout out to John, who owns the Salem Witchboard Museum and the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore. And then, of course, our very dearly beloved friends and Fangs and Infernos that are tied in with us in Mark and Lizzie, rockinghorror.com, the only place where you can get our official Vampire and Devil podcast merch, from hats, shirts, tanks, hoodies, all that fun stuff. And Devil and I have some other things kind of in mind that we're going to play around with a little bit as well. But those items you can get right now if you want to look fashionably evil as being a fans of the show. We very, very much appreciate it, because not only do we appreciate it, Mark and Lizzie absolutely appreciate it because you're supporting them. But that's how it's going to be. So much love and so much awesome conversation, as Devil and I got to do such a great deep dive into the legacy, the history, and all the amazing films of Tim Burton. And we can't wait for the next one to talk about that as well. So that's the way that it's going to be, etched in stone forever and for always. Signing off on the Tim Burton episode of the Vampire and Devil podcast. Horns up. Fangs out.